Sorry for my recent absence. The thing is, those of you who have referred to me in the past as Daddy Darkness are no longer weird. Because I'm a dad. I had a baby a couple of days ago, and I've been happy but sleepless since then. So today I've got a big compilation of the trucker stories I've narrated in the past, all in one easy-to-enjoy episode. So, while I'm desperately trying to figure out how to properly swaddle a baby, y'all be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org, because I plan on doing even more scary camping stories right after this episode. Thank you everyone for sticking by me all these years. Now, let's begin. The Night They Roamed the Road, from Jerry Scott. I've been a trucker since my mid-20s. I've had many odd experiences on the road. I'm pretty sure that I've come across a couple of UFOs while driving late at night and encountered many strange drivers at times. However, the encounter I'm going to share today is by far the most terrifying and strange experience I've ever had. This happened on a country road in the middle of Kansas when I was 37. The year was 2009. The night started off like most nights, which consisted of me driving and listening to some music on the radio, usually drinking some coffee to keep myself from getting too tired. As I drove through the night on the empty road, I had noticed that it began to get foggy. This fog eventually became very thick, and I started thinking to myself whether I should pull over for a while, as I could barely see ahead, or keep driving. I thought about it, and decided to continue on. There were 0 other people so far out driving in the middle of the country, so maybe it was safer than I thought. I still took precaution. I was going slowly, just in case an animal or something were to run across the road. As I continued driving, I started to pick up an odor. This odor was the most foul thing I've ever smelled, and it soon filled the inside of my truck. I quickly closed the windows, but that didn't help. This terrible smell was already inside, and I felt as if I was going to vomit. The smell and the fog became overwhelming. I remember thinking to myself, what in the world could be causing such an awful stench? In that same moment, I felt that unpleasant feeling when you know you're about to throw up. I had no choice but to quickly stop the truck and open the door to empty my stomach. When I was finished, I quickly covered my face, as that horrible smell was still in the air. I closed the door and prepared myself to start driving again, and that's when I noticed something ahead crossing the road. The figure was unmistakably a man, and this man appeared to be limping. Other than his limping, I also noticed that the man was wearing an old white button shirt and black suspenders. I recall thinking to myself how strange and freaky the situation was, and not knowing what to do. I decided that I was just going to ask if he was okay, and if I should call anyone for help. Before I was able to drive up to him, I soon noticed that 4 more people came out from the side of the road, all walking in the same direction as the first man I saw. Each of them were walking in that same odd limping gait, all of them wearing outdated farming clothes. What I found even more strange was the fact that they didn't acknowledge the huge truck that was on the other side of the road. I thought to myself, if these people needed help, then surely they would come to me. However, all of them continued limping across the road, disappearing into the darkness and the fog. I must also remind you we were in the middle of Kansas, so basically the middle of nowhere. Just then, another figure emerged from the darkness and began to cross the road too. However, this figure was far smaller. I soon realized that this was a child. I got out of my truck, but I did not go up to the kid. Rather, I stared at him as he continued to cross the road. This child was also walking in a weird way and was wearing that old clothing too. Right when he was about to make it to the other side, I said aloud, "Do any of you need help?" The child stopped, turning his head to face me. My heart sank all the way to my feet as soon as I saw his face. I wasn't looking at the face of an ordinary child. I was looking at the face of a corpse. I cursed under my breath and stood there in fear. This thing then let out the most awful scream I've ever heard and began to limp towards me, but at a quicker speed than before. I quickly got back inside the truck and slammed the door shut. In that very moment, I heard even more of those horrifying screams and saw more of these things beginning to emerge from the darkness. I quickly swerved around the kid, speeding out of there as quick as I could. During that whole ordeal, I saw the faces of the other ones that were coming, and they all had the face of decomposed corpses. Once I made it back to civilization, I stopped at a gas station. I just sat there in my truck. My mind and heart were still racing and had no idea what to think. This experience opened me up to many things. I feel like I understand that this world is indeed strange, and there might always be things which we do not understand. My Trucker Stories, from Brandon K. I've been driving trucks for the past 12 years. By now, I've driven all over the US, Canada, Kuwait, and Iraq, and I've seen a lot of stuff. From fatal truck wrecks to things I just can't explain. Here are a few stories of my experiences as a big wrecker operator and as a long-haul trucker. When I first started out, I worked for a big wrecker rescue company, doing tows and working car and truck wrecks. One night, I was called out to tow a car about an hour away. Once I dropped the car off, I was driving back to the shop, and I began to feel pretty sleepy. I was coming down what's called Sewell Mountain, when all of a sudden, I spotted a woman in a white flowing dress walking right out in front of my truck. I slammed on the brakes, and when I finally came to a stop, I got out, terrified, thinking that I had just hit someone. But when I looked at the front of the truck and underneath, there was no blood, no woman, no damage to my truck whatsoever. Just black marks on the asphalt and the sound of my truck running. Needless to say, I didn't feel so sleepy for the rest of the night. When I finally got home and was able to go to bed, this woman in white kept appearing in my mind over and over again. After a while, I played it off as me just being tired, and my eyes playing tricks on me. But when I told a friend of mine that lived in the area about what I thought I'd experienced, he looked surprised. He then told me that several years earlier, a woman had been brutally murdered on that mountain. Since then, people have claimed to see the woman in a white flowing dress around that same area. My second quick story has to do with my trucker nightmares. Nightmares about driving down the road in my rig, and out of nowhere cars will just appear stopped in the middle of the road for no reason, and just before I have a chance to hit the brakes, I wake up sweating. I've had this nightmare more times than I can count. Whether I'm asleep in the truck or at home, I have them. It's always the same scenario, but different locations. Once when I was teaming, I started having the nightmare, and when I saw the cars and went to slam on the brakes, my co-driver, who was actually driving at the time, really did have to slam on the brakes. I woke up feeling like my heart was going to jump out of my chest. I thought the nightmares were just something only I experienced. But after talking to my uncle who used to be a long-haul trucker, as well as several other old-school truckers, they all told me that every trucker has nightmares after they do this job long enough. I've come to accept it as something that comes with the job. My last story is another big wrecker rescue story. I worked 12 truck wrecks while working as a big wrecker rescue driver, and that does not include all the car wrecks. But this wreck in particular had to be the weirdest accident I ever worked. It also paints a scary picture of how inexperienced some of these new drivers are, and how little they are trained now. So I got a call one night that there was a tractor trailer turned over on a westbound exit about 9 miles away from our shop. I was the first driver on the scene, and I saw that the trailer had indeed turned over, but the truck was setting upright. I walked up to the truck and knocked on the door, when the driver stuck his head out of the window. I scratched my head and said, "But I just have to ask, how in the world did you get the truck unhooked from the trailer before it turned over on its side?" He told me he had to get diesel fuel. I looked at him and said, "And you unhooked the trailer, why?" To which he responded with, "I didn't think my trailer would fit under the pumps." I told him if his trailer wouldn't fit, then the truck wouldn't fit. And I also said if you did have to unhook your trailer, then why didn't he just unhook it on the diesel lot? He simply said he didn't know. When he unhooked his trailer, he dropped it on a shale bank, and the trailer was hauling 8 or 9 of those big 6,000-pound rolls of paper from the paper mill. And when he pulled his truck out from underneath the trailer, the shale bank shifted, causing the trailer to turn over. I asked how long he'd been with the company, and he told me that he was still on his 90-day probation period. I looked at him and I said, "Well, you were just fired." He got offended and asked how I knew that. I told him, "Trust me, when you call your company and tell them what you did, they're going to fire you on the spot." We had to give him a ride to our shop so we could call his company. He was on the phone for roughly 10 to 15 minutes and came out of the office with a grim look on his face, said that they fired him. I looked at him and said I tried to tell you. To all my truckers out there, thank you for what you do, and be safe. Terrifying encounter on the road, from the awoken swamp creature. It was 15 years ago when I was 8. My dad was a trucker, and as one might expect, he spent a lot of time on the road. When I was on break for school, my dad would often take me with him, trucking across many states. I enjoyed going with my dad, mainly because the open road is so relaxing, and we'd stop by many places to eat along the way. This particular time I went was during the summer of 2005, a week or so after the school year ended. My dad told me to pack a bit extra this time, due to the fact that he was going further than usual on this route. That evening I started packing my clothes and any sort of entertainment, which ended up just being my Game Boy Color. Early the next morning, my dad and I left to the place where the truck was kept, and we departed from there. The first couple of hours were usually just driving non-stop, so I took the time to play my Game Boy, and to gaze out the window from time to time. About 3 hours later, my dad asked me if I was hungry, so we went to a McDonald's to eat some food. After finishing our meals, we got back in the truck and began driving again. Another hour of driving down an empty road had passed. We were both suddenly startled by a loud scraping sound on the bottom right side of the truck. My dad pulled over, exiting the truck to see what the noise was. I stayed inside. I didn't really see what happened. I do remember my dad being on the phone. He sounded very upset. Eventually, Dad got back inside the truck and told me we're going to have to stop by somewhere first, because something happened to the truck. Before I knew it, we had arrived at some repair-looking shop. Then my dad went to go talk to someone who was inside. A couple of minutes later, my dad returned, telling me to get out of the truck because it needed to be checked. I wasn't told what the problem with the truck was. My dad and I waited about 4 hours or so for the man to finish what he was doing, and once he was done, we left and continued on. It was about 6 p.m. by then, and I started to play on my Game Boy again, given there was still some light out to see the screen. I wanted to play as much as I could before the sun began to set. I continued to play for another hour or so until I got sleepy. So I turned off the Game Boy and rested my head on the side of the door, staring out the window and watching the trees as we drove by, eventually falling asleep. I abruptly awoke from my sleep due to my dad driving very fast down the road. I remember looking out the window and seeing that the sun had already started setting, and it was darker outside than it had been before I fell asleep. I then remember my dad telling me, "Don't be scared," which confused me at the moment because I had no idea what was going on. I then asked my dad why he was driving so fast. He didn't answer, keeping his face forward toward the road. I stared at him, and that's when I saw movement coming from outside his window. At first, all I saw was something white rushing up to his window and then rushing back off. I was still very confused, wondering what in the world it was and why it was going so fast. The object then came into view again. This time it got close enough to slap the driver's side window. When it got that close to the truck, I was able to get a pretty good look at it. What I saw was what appeared to be a woman with long black hair covering most of her face, and she was wearing a white gown. She appeared to be floating. She flew back away for a minute, and then soon came again quickly, slapping the window once more, only to fly back away. This spirit then came back, and I quickly closed my eyes when I saw that it was about to press its face against the driver's side window. I heard my dad scream and curse, telling me not to look. I kept my eyes shut, hearing my dad starting to whimper too. All I can remember after that is that I kept my eyes closed until we made it back to civilization. Whatever we saw that night has haunted me for years after that. I still get chills when I think about it. I have no idea what that thing was and what it wanted. I don't know exactly which state we were in either, only that it happened somewhere in the southeast of the US. This was something that was never discussed between my dad and I, and sadly, he passed away 6 years ago due to medical issues. Until recently, I thought that he never told anyone about what happened. About 2 months ago, my mom and I were talking about Dad and his side of the family. We eventually began talking about my grandparents. As we were talking about Grandma, my mom, seemingly out of nowhere, asked me about that night when my dad and I were out trucking. I was shocked to have found out that my dad actually told my mom about it, considering it was never brought up before, at least not in front of me. She asked me if I saw the face of the thing that was outside the truck, and I said no. She stayed silent for a couple of seconds, then asked me if I ever noticed my dad acting weird after that. I told her that the only thing I found strange was that he never talked about it. My mom then told me the scariest thing I'd ever heard. She explained to me that when the thing pressed its face against the driver's side window, it had said something to my father. It said something to him in my grandma's voice, his mother's voice, and when he heard it, he looked at the thing's face and saw the face of his dead mother. According to my mom, that experience forever haunted my dad, and he would have constant nightmares of it ever since. That thing stole the peace from my dad's remaining years. Woman on the Road, from Trucker Net. I'm a 27-year-old guy, a truck driver from Southeast Texas. I've been driving trucks for about 8 years now and love every minute of it. Getting paid to travel America, I couldn't ask for anything more. On the road, I've experienced plenty of obstacles and the unexplained, including car accidents, trucks flipping over right in front of me, to odd shadows on the road. But the incident that happened to me while driving to Corpus Christi, Texas from Houston, Texas, was by far the weirdest, and I still cannot explain it at all. Probably never will, because I told myself I'm never going back on that road. To begin with, I drive double trailers for a furniture company. I always drive nights and finish at about 5 a.m. That night, I just got finished getting loaded and was heading to Corpus Christi from Houston, which was about a 3.5-hour drive. I'd made the trip plenty of times before, so I played a podcast, sipped on my coffee, and drove into the night. I drove for about 2 hours until I reached this back road, a decent shortcut. This back road I take is a thin road, and there are absolutely no cars or houses for miles that I can see. Most I've seen are deer, even a few wild hogs here and there, and the beautiful night sky. As I'm driving about 10 miles in, I notice a figure on the road up ahead. Instinctively, I slow down, thinking it's a deer or another kind of animal of some sort. I was hoping it would move, but as I drew closer to it, I noticed it wasn't an animal, but an average-height girl walking with her back towards me, not in the slightest acknowledging that a semi was coming towards her. She didn't seem bothered by the fact that she was in the middle of the road. I slowed down to about 15 miles per hour and tried to pass her safely, using the other lane, as the road had no shoulder. As I passed her, I noticed that she was wearing sweats and a white shirt, and she wasn't wearing shoes. Her hair was blonde, but I could not see her face. As soon as my rig began to pass her, I slowed down even more. I was worried, and I was going to roll down the window and ask if she needed help. Once my window reached parallel to her, I began to roll it down, but she turned her head to look in at me. She did it so fast, it was like she snapped her neck. As we made eye contact for a brief second, I was able to get a good look at her face. And by God, did I nearly soil myself. The woman's face was pale, with a blank expression, and she stared at me as if looking into my very soul. Her eyeliner was dripping all over her face, as her eyes seemed to be full of tears. She had an unbelievably long mouth that looked like she used eyeliner to make her mouth look bigger and in the form of a permanent smile. As I looked at her face, I put the hammer down on the pedal. A semi takes a long time to speed up, especially with 2 loaded trailers. As I passed her, she began running after the truck, legit running after me. I eventually built up speed and looked in the mirror. She was gone. She had just vanished. She might have gone in the bushes, but I doubt there was enough time for her to do that. But I can't be sure, so I couldn't tell you. About 40 miles later, I made it to the end of the back road, and as I made a right turn at a stop sign, there was a car and a Honda. It was on the right side of the road in the grass, with a woman with blonde hair and smeared eyeliner staring at me as I made the turn. I'm not sure what I saw that day, if it was real or if I was tired, but ever since then, I never take that road, and I try to avoid any back roads as much as possible. Desert UFO from Ninita, Brazil. I'm a female truck driver, been on the road for the past 20 years. One night around 2 or 3 a.m., I was traveling on SR 95 from Arizona to Nevada. For those who don't know, the area is very desolate. It's over 400 miles of pure desert. The only things around are the occasional border patrol checkpoints. After clearing the first border control checkpoint and driving several more miles in, I noticed what could only be explained as a 2-mile-wide black light pillar that was darker than night. That put me in a very curious and apprehensive mood. I never thought that something like that was possible. Traffic at the time was almost non-existent. I could see as far as my headlights would let me. I would say around 8 to 10 miles behind me is very flat land. As I passed this dark pillar, about a mile later, I saw what appeared to be a rest area. It was very bright up ahead. I remember thinking they must be having a rave. I could make out different color lights. As I was entertaining my thoughts of joining the party, my truck just shut down. I struggled to pull to the side of the road. As I was doing so, I noticed the headlights behind me. One by one, they were turning off. And then I noticed the dark pillar in the sky. It was still very much there. I looked forward to see what I thought was the rest area. But it wasn't. Because it lifted off the ground, the lights became brighter than the sun, lighting up the entire desert as if it was daytime. Before I could even rationalize it, it just shot off into the sky and disappeared. Then and only then did the headlights behind me and my own vehicle turn back on. I drove confused and a bit scared for another 6 to 8 miles, where I found a real rest stop. I stopped and joined the other truckers there, many of which also witnessed the event, and we discussed it for 10 minutes or so. There were so many people there discussing this that no one really cared to park correctly. There must have been between 50 and 80 people there, all talking about the strange UFO we'd seen. Many of us called and reported the sighting. You might even be able to pull it up online if they archived it. It was June 2013. I really don't think we're so alone in this universe. Room 605, from Nanita, Brazil. Back in 2012, I experienced the worst snowstorm I've ever seen. I was picking up a load in Spokane, Washington. As I was driving my truck, I kept sliding and swerving on the road, no traction whatsoever. And even with my heater on, it was extremely cold. My cell phone rang at one point. It was my company informing me that they made a hotel reservation for me in the area, as the weather forecast was predicting extreme cold temperatures. For those familiar with trucking companies, they can be very cheap. They got me a horrible hotel room. Room 605. I noticed that the attendant had a smirk on his face as he handed me the key. That bothered me a bit. I wasn't sure what he meant by that, so as I was going to the second floor, I noticed that I might be the only person in this hotel, and I didn't like that either. The snow outside was bad. I mean terrible. The snowflakes themselves were huge. As I walked to my room, I began to hear loud knocking on the wall beside me. They seemed to follow me all the way to the bathroom. I ignored the knocking. As a female driver, I figured it may be some guys who had seen me walking in, maybe even other truckers who were stuck here, and this was their way of catcalling, which I certainly didn't appreciate. As I looked in my room, the first thing I noticed was a tube TV. I forced myself to go back to my truck, grabbing a 36-inch flat screen with an HDMI. This would help me get much more comfortable in my room. I plugged my computer into the TV and was relieved to see that they had good Wi-Fi. I quickly pulled up a page to keep an eye on the weather conditions. After taking a long shower, the knocks kept going, and I did my best to ignore them. Back in my room, I started to get comfortable, but immediately got a lot of pressure and pain in my chest. It was so bad I thought of calling the paramedics, but with the storm I thought that they would never get here. I stepped outside for a bit, and soon, luckily, it passed. Outside, I noticed right in front of the hotel was the fire department, which was even better. I felt relieved that help was so close, in case the pain came back. As if like a light switch, as soon as I stepped back into my hotel room, the pain came again, worse this time. It was too much for me. I ran across the street and talked to some paramedics. They put me on an EKG machine and told me I'm fine, and if things get worse, don't hesitate to call. Long story short, this awful chest pain that made me feel like I was dying happened 8 times that night, all while the knocking kept coming and coming. I ended up calling the paramedics over. While they were at the hotel, they checked for any carbon monoxide leaks, but that was fine too. When they were gone, I decided to pray. My mother always gave me holy water to bless my truck. I sprinkled a bit in the room, then lay down on the bed. And to my horror, the bed began to shake slightly. I was hoping that the people next door were just having a good time, if you know what I'm saying. But then the whole bed just slid to the center of the room. I was terrified. I quickly ran to turn on the lights, and as I looked back, I swear I saw a shadow move from the bedside to the bathroom. I tried to remain calm, but I felt more angry than scared by then. This thing was attacking me, and it had no right to. I prayed even harder then, dousing the place with more holy water. I entered the bathroom, but then the bathroom door slammed shut behind me. I stood my ground. It was then that I saw the shampoo bottle lift off the ground and arch backward, as if someone was about to throw it. Eventually, it did throw the bottle at me, then the soap and conditioner too. When I realized it was able to interact with solid objects like that to hurt me, I wondered what else it was capable of. I ran out of the room then, to the fire department. I told them what happened, but they had a good laugh. I told them to look towards my room. Mine was the only one with the lights on. It seemed I really was the only person staying there. And on my floor, we could make out a shadowy figure standing in the window. I could hear the firefighters gasp. The cops were called, and they checked my room. My room was in tatters, my laptop and TV in pieces, my clothes scattered across the room. I didn't bother picking up my things that night, and despite the cold, I slept in my truck that night. I couldn't help but remember the smirk on the attendant's face, like he knew what I was about to experience, and he still let me stay in that room. It was that experience that confirmed the supernatural for me. Be wary of staying in any room 605s in Spokane, Washington. Crowbar, submitted by Travis N. Back in 1995, I drove an 18-wheeler for a living for a short period of time. While I only traveled the highways for a little over a year, I had the pleasure, most of the time, of meeting some very nice and interesting fellow truckers. I don't recall where I was when this story was relayed to me, but I remember it was very cold and late as I pulled into a small truck stop somewhere in the Midwest. I applied the rig's safety brakes and left her running, while I ducked inside for a shower and a bite to eat. So after a filling of greasy yet hot meal, I lounged back sipping some of my hot coffee, counting the miles in my head and trying to do the math on my ETA at my drop site the following day. Satisfied I could afford the time to rest a while, I lounged languidly in the booth sipping my coffee and barely listening to the light sound of some music flowing through the small quiet truck stop, interrupted periodically by a noise from the kitchen or the waitress's chatter with another customer. I began to doze sitting up, the warm air and heavy meal taking its toll after the long day's drive. As my eyelids fought gravity, a voice addressed me. "Hey there." My eyes shot open to see a large burly trucker in coveralls. He was wearing an old hat that had seen so much use its logo was now unreadable. He had a thick beard and kind eyes. His face had been weathered perhaps by years of being on the road. A true veteran. Hello. Sorry, I began as he held up a patient hand, indicating he understood, and his face transferred the emotion of being sorry to have disturbed me. No, I understand. But if you don't mind some company, I haven't had a proper conversation with a live person in 3 days. He said it politely, but also his body language and demeanor seemed to leave me an out, if I wasn't up for it. I was. So I motioned for him to settle in as I roused myself from a slumped position, a little happy myself to have a conversation that wasn't on a CB radio. He maneuvered his bulk somewhat awkwardly into the small booth, chuckling about the situation. I myself was no lean, trim athlete, but this guy was big. Not weightlifter big, but a throwback to the 80s wrestler big. In fact, he kind of reminded me of Hillbilly Jim, the wrestler back in the day. In fact, he introduced himself as Jim and shook my hand. As we made small talk, I mostly listened, occasionally telling him where I was from, where I was headed, who I drove for, the usual trucker small talk. He told me he was an owner-operator, his own boss, and he drove a flatbed hauling tractor parts at the moment. Then he began to ask me how I was holding up, if I liked my job. Real friendly conversation. Jim was honest, and what you saw is what you got. He seemed very enthused to have someone to talk to. Before we both knew it, an hour had flown by. He started to make a gesture to leave, voicing that he didn't want to overstay his welcome, to which I waved away the comment. Actually, Jim, I'm in no hurry, and you aren't bothering me at all. I was kind of hoping I'd meet someone eventually that I could talk shop with and get an idea of what to expect out there. Jim smiled, and he seemed genuinely happy to hang out a little longer. He chuckled and mentioned, "I'm kinda glad you said that, 'cause I'm not sure I can get out of this booth at the moment." I laughed at him and took his meaning. It was warm and cozy despite the tight fit. He finished his coffee and casually lifted his mug to the waitress, along with a patient smile. He leaned forward as much as his girth would allow. He snorted and made himself comfortable, then asked, "You want to hear a true story, buddy?" He paused as the waitress filled his cup. I shook my head politely as she looked towards me. As soon as the waitress was satisfied that we were content, she moved on. Jim leaned in on his elbows, hovering his thick gray beard over his steaming mug. "You gotta be careful out there, friend," he began. "You see, a fella like you driving for one of those big companies has too many rules." I raised an eyebrow. How so? I mean, yes, he was right, of course. There were way too many rules, most with safety in mind, but I was curious where he was going with this. I had heard of truckers carrying illegal weights on back roads, trying to avoid scales like up in Idaho, where an owner-operator of one's own rig could get paid by the pound. So naturally, there were those that loaded the crap out of their trailers, then rolled on heavy, hoping the DOT didn't pull them over and shut them down with a hefty fine. Then the profit was gone. But Jim wasn't talking about illegal weights or cheating logbooks for extended driving purposes. He paused and looked down as if deciding how to begin. "Well, about 10 years ago, I was hauling box trailers like you are now. I was in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin." Again, Jim paused, but not for effect. I could tell he was reliving some deep stuff, and I suddenly felt like I was violating his privacy. I felt awkward, but it passed as Jim continued. "So," he began sipping again at the steaming caffeine. "I'm getting tired and it's about 1 or 2 in the morning, so I know it's about time to pull her over and get some shut-eye." Jim went on as I felt my drowsiness dimming. "Well, as fate would have it, I see a sign for a Flying J truck stop. So I pull in and back her up and leave her idle. It was cold as a moose's tits out there, and I wasn't coming back to a freezing truck." He chuckled as we both looked outside at the freezing parking lot. Smiling, I nodded all too well how much I understood that. So I gathered up my stuff and rolled my fat self out of the truck, looking forward to a shower and some chow. He paused briefly. Now, I got my bag slung over my shoulder, and I lower myself to the asphalt and head on in, after locking her up still running, of course. I nodded for him to continue. Like I said earlier, there's laws and there's rules, being that we drive federal motor carriers. I sensed where Jim was going with this. Jim had been armed. A lot of owner-operators carry weapons, some being guns, despite the federal law prohibiting it. However, many company drivers like myself seldom carried anything, as we could lose our jobs just for having a gun in the vehicle, and that's just for starters. Jim grunts as he shifts in the booth. I eat, I shower, and you know the routine. It's time to hit the rack. I cross the tarmac-sized parking lot heading back to my truck. He trails off, looking into his half-empty coffee mug. "Man," he exclaims in a whisper, I can remember that cold air on my wet head. Hell, even with my hat on, I couldn't get back home to the truck fast enough. I had my keys ready, and I unlocked the door and popped the hatch. That warm air hit me, and I thought nothing could feel that welcoming. And I was right. Jim looks right into my eyes. I grab the trail, balancing my bag on my shoulder, and hike a foot up to the first runner. And then it happens. Jim makes a comic book-like noise or sound effect. Thwack! Right in the freaking ankle. I mean instant, chilling pain. I immediately drop, or more or less crumple to the ground, stunned from the blow and the fall. My ankle was on fire, and if you've ever taken a shot from anything in that freezing cold, it hurts. It hurts bad. He wasn't kidding, and now I was hooked. Jim continues with his voice now trembling, just slightly. I admired his ability to contain himself, as he continues as what he tells me horrifies me. I'm trying to pick myself back up, and I look up to see this figure, this shadow crawling out from under my rig. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at, and my ankle was numb. It was on fire at the same time. I simply couldn't get up. I just couldn't. I was all bundled up, overweight, and now crippled after being struck apparently, and falling off of my running trail. Holy hell, I muttered, my guts nodding in anticipation. Hell is right, Jim chided. So now I can make some sense out of what just happened, but there ain't no time, as this scrawny, wasted-looking fellow with a crowbar in his hand is scuttling out from under my rig, right towards me. Now I don't know what this guy's intentions were. Rob me? Kill me? Both? Steal my rig? All of the above. He choked back some of the dark memory. This guy is crawling out from under my truck, and he's almost cleared the running board, which will give him a much better position of opportunity concerning my potential fate. Then I saw the look in his eyes. It was a look of madness. You know, when you can tell someone is committed to whatever they're gonna do, no matter what. Yeah, this guy with his wet, stringy hair looked desperate and savage at the same time. I've no doubt he was one or both. Just Christ, I sighed. What did you do, Jim? I asked, fully enthralled in his tale. I was sitting across from a living Jim, and I already assumed he survived the encounter. But how? Well, he went on, I pulled out my .357 Magnum from my shower bag. Like I said, laws and rules are for some. I shot him twice in the chest. I was terrified, Jim admitted. Freaking terrified, and in some serious shock. Well, I hit him both times, and needless to say, the encounter was over, just like that. It seemed like it lasted forever, and at the same time just a few seconds. Hell, it don't really matter how long it took, but I finished what he had started. Jim seemed sad. He seemed lost for a second. I sympathized with him and empathized as well. He hated it. He wasn't bragging, and I was right. Jim's eyes watered a second or two, but being the tough trucker he was, he dried up just that quick. He shook his head. I just can't imagine how desperate, or what this guy was thinking, but in the end it didn't matter. He was gone. Jim went on to tell me the Magnum gunshots alerted the truck stop and the police were called promptly, as well as an ambulance for Jim. The crowbar guy didn't need one. Yep, I spent 3 days in the hospital with my life idling out there in some truck stop with 2 bullet holes in her. He laughed a little to ease the tension. No, they towed the bastard. Took good care of her for me until I could get around again. But man, that's your home. And well, I killed that stupid guy. I killed that stupid bastard. Jim trailed off with a quizzical look on his face as he quickly reflected back to that night. The table lurched a little as Jim awkwardly shuffled to his feet, throwing a few ones on the table. Be careful out there, kid. Always be aware of your surroundings. All of them, he stressed. He tipped his hat at me, smiled, and as he lumbered off, I noticed for the first time he had a slight limp in his right leg. The Unmarked Semi. Submitted by Hannah R. This happened about a decade ago, but I remember it very vividly. I was 16 years old, and it was May 20th of 2008. My mom and 2 friends and I were on our way over the Cascade Mountain Range to see our favorite band in Seattle. I live in the dead center of Washington State, about 3 hours from Seattle. For those of you who live in the South or other states that don't have mountain passes, basically to get to towns that are on the other side of the mountains, you have to drive up and through the mountains on a highway with an extremely steep incline. And yep, you guessed it, people always speed. They pass when there are no passing lanes, and a lot of fatal car accidents happen on this specific pass we were traveling. There is always a chance something bad is going to happen when driving it. So we started on our journey in the afternoon, and we weren't even to the top of the pass yet, when in the rearview mirror behind us in our lane, my mom spots a few cars going off into the ditches and on the side of the road. They were lucky it wasn't a sheer drop-off at that point of the road. It's only 2-lane traffic, so yeah, whatever was forcing these cars off the road was definitely gaining on us fast. My friends and I were looking back to see what craziness was happening, and we spot it. We relay the information back to my mom, who needs to really focus on driving right about now, and she can't see what's going on behind her. It's a massive semi-truck. It has a huge cabin, light blue, and completely blacked out windows. I mean, you could literally not even see a silhouette from anyone inside. The semi is about 3 cars behind us now. It is literally hauling up this very steep incline. That's pretty much not even possible for semi-trucks to do that. They usually put on their hazards and slow down, then get to the right of this steep hill. As he was gaining on us, he was forcing more and more cars behind us off of the road. He just didn't care. Whoever this was not caring about the safety of anyone else, and we were now very, very scared for our lives. My mom has a Subaru Forester, so we were outrunning him pretty good. Then he was right behind us, so my mom pulled over to the right and slowed down as much as she could, just to let him pass. As he passed, we wanted to take down his plate number and company so that we could call in a very deserved complaint. I kid you not only the trailer of the truck was completely blank, but the doors of the cabin were completely blank as well. They didn't even have any plates, and all that was visible was a giant American flag painted on the front of the grille. That's some scary stuff just remembering it right now. Thankfully, he didn't force us off the road. The other cars were staying really far back from him, but my mom was in shock and really ticked off, so we sped up to pass him and get away from him for good. We didn't want to witness or be behind him when he caused a massive wreck. So pretty fast we got up next to the guy to pass him. At this point it had turned into 2 lanes, so it was safe and legal to pass. We were almost clear of him, but one of my dumb friends literally just flipped him off. That's a genius move, isn't it? Especially when doing it to someone who literally just doesn't care. So we passed him, barely. Then he starts speeding up again to do who knows what to us, so my mom just floors it. At this point we were close to the top of the pass, which levels off and then starts to descend down the other side of the mountain. There's always a pull-off area to the right, so she just floored it into the dirt area as close to the edge of the woods as she could, then slammed on the brakes, all at the same time telling us to get out of the car as fast as possible and to run into the trees. This was serious. The car wasn't even fully stopped yet as we flung those doors open. We left them open and ran into the woods. We ran about 30 yards in, then finally stopped and gathered ourselves. We were so scared to go back to the car because what if he had stopped too? Who knows what's happening at our vehicle? But we had somewhere to be and the clock was ticking. So after a few minutes we went back, and thankfully there was no sign of him and regular traffic was on the road, which was such a sight to see, considering we could have been pancakes just a few seconds before. After we did get back on the road, only a few minutes later, we passed 3 different cars, all of which looked like their rear ends had been crushed. We then called 911. We told them what happened and where the scene was. Then we described the semi-truck to them, and hopefully they would catch this psycho that didn't have any business being behind the wheel of something so big. To this day, we really don't know who was driving that thing or what they had in their trailer, but it couldn't have been anything good. By the look of things, about how they just didn't care about anyone else, that they just wanted to get to their destination faster than possible. I'm sure they were hauling something illegal, or just something scary. Who knows, but it still gives me chills. That blacked out cabin with the American flag. We survived and made it to the concert, and I got attacked in the mosh pit. It was a great night altogether. In the end, all I want to say is to be safe on the roads. I suggest you hold back your road rage and not pick fights with other vehicles. It's difficult sometimes, but you just never know the scary people and unknown things out there. Who knows when you'll flip off the wrong person, only to have them blindside you in your car out of nowhere. Trucker Encounter. Submitted by Nick. This incident happened only a few months ago. The exact date slips my mind. We had been on a road trip to my old hometown. We had my childhood home up for rent and were going to evict the current renters for ignorance. And sadly, we lived about 46 hours away, clear across the state. Thankfully, me and my mother had actually been around the state many times, from delivering animals for money to just trying to find a new state to live in, from California to Oklahoma. The exact place this happened had to be somewhere in Nebraska. It was late at dusk. After driving for days and being so close to our destination, it seemed like a breath of fresh air to see a Pilot gas station. Bright yellow lights made the place look like a little inn, especially with the massive big rigs that seemed to make their home for the night there. Now, when we got there, I probably looked a bit peculiar. Bi-colored hair and totally greasy looking. The immense heat was a horrible drag, but the dimming night cooled it to a comfortable temperature. Going into the rather big establishment, I beelined for the restroom so I could fix myself up. I ran into a big hunk of a driver exiting the open shower rooms. I didn't pay much mind to him. At the time, I was just too concerned with myself. I may have noticed that he took a second look at me if I hadn't been so distracted, but I would later find out after the incident. After caring for myself and getting a drink, I went outside to cool off. We had parked off to the very edge of the big rigs, but I wanted to stretch my legs out, so I decided to walk around the fully shut down and supposedly sleeping big rigs. The majority of the running ones were parked in the back, which I made sure to stay away from, as to not interrupt or be in the way. My mother was content doing her scratch-offs in the truck, so I decided to take my time, knowing it would be a while before we absolutely needed to go. The night air had finally cooled down, and I was lounging down with my Gatorade bottle when that same big rig driver walked by, to which I gave a casual wave, something we do to everyone, even strangers. I didn't feel creeped out then, just a tad bit of anxiety, since I had just run into the guy, but again I ignored him. It wasn't long before I decided to go back to the truck. I moved my way past through the big rigs to reach the truck quicker. As I passed through the first 2 rows of trucks, I suddenly heard a gruff cough, just to see the same guy somewhat blocking my path. I slowed down, and I felt a tad eerie, as how much of a coincidence would it have to be to see the same guy where I'm at 3 times in a row? Right as I'm about to walk past him, the guy grabs my arm. I stiffened up and turned to him, obviously nervous and a bit irritated. I remember saying, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" I've personally heard enough trucker murderer stories to know to be freaked out at that point, so assuming I was in danger, I made sure to tell him of my mother waiting and such. But this mountain of a man seemed to not be fazed whatsoever. He smelled of oil and sweat. I jerked my arm away and moved back, hearing him speak now. "Aw, now come on. Don't you want to see the inside of my rig?" I shook my head no and went to turn around and pull away, only to be grabbed again, and at this point I was getting terrified and pissed. Now that I look back on it, screaming would have been a great option, but I was so angry and horrified, it slipped my mind entirely. I turned to him and said in my most sarcastic voice, "I'm sure your rig is beautiful, but I need to get back." Before I could finish, he interrupted me. "Now, Missy, please come take a ride with me. I could show you some pretty neat things." He began to pull on me, moving towards the rig next to us. If I had watched him earlier, I would have totally bypassed this aisle, but I didn't. Again, a dumb decision. I struggled from his grasp when finally, he tried to get a better grip by letting go and grabbing me again, but I thankfully slipped far enough away in a jog. I took a deep breath and I ran toward the truck. Back in the truck, I pondered the incident as a flood of rigs went by. I assumed he was in one of them. Considering what he'd just done, he was probably making his getaway, watching me from his cab. I ended up not telling my mother until after we made it home. The moral of the story here is to pay attention to those who surround you. Don't walk around alone with no protection, in the middle of nowhere at some gas station. How did she survive? Submitted by Jessica. This is a story told to me by my uncle. His name is Stacy, actually. I love listening to stories about each state and seeing pictures from places I've always wanted to go. He always seems to have a story of creepy people or drunks he's encountered, but this one chills me in a special way. We live in Tennessee. One day he had to take a load of produce to Illinois. He left around 2 a.m. because where he needed to pick up his trailer was rather far away, and he wanted to get a head start. Around 6 in the morning, he picked up his load and headed off. Fast forward about 3 hours and he's in the middle of Kentucky. He pulled off in a truck stop to get some dinner, because he had to take a break later so he could go to sleep and rest up a bit. He ordered a hamburger and sat down to enjoy. Then some girl walks up to him dressed in a ragged dress. My uncle politely asks if he could help her, and she just said, "I put his body in the river. It's in trash bags." Right away, this freaks my uncle out. He looks away from her and tries to ignore what she just said, trying to finish his food. But she sat next to him and stares at him. When he finishes, he asks the server for directions to the nearest gas station. She told him where the next one was, and when he goes to head out, that same girl was waiting for him by his truck. He asked her to please move so that he could get inside, and she replied, "No, don't you want to see the bodies? They're just across the hill in the river. They've been there for about a week. Why doesn't anyone want to see them? They have the same horror on their faces as when I slit their throats." Now my uncle just pushes her out of the way, then crawled into his truck and locked the doors. He figured it was probably a prank, and decides to go to the gas station for a bottle of water. He stops off at a 7-Eleven and got a 6-pack of water. But that same girl was still outside his truck, which shouldn't have been possible in that time frame. He was ready to finish and go home, so he tells the girl to get the hell out of the way, to just leave him alone. He says this time he noticed her eyes. They were red, and the next moment he blinked, the girl was gone. My uncle got into his truck, drove to the shoulder of the road and just parked it there. He felt like he needed to be out of the way if he was going to get some rest, and after seeing something like that, it took him a long time to finally get some sleep. He had probably been resting for 2 hours when he heard his truck door violently try to be opened. He opened the curtains only to see the same girl holding a knife, a bloody knife. She was saying, "I told you, the bodies are real, and you're about to be one of them." Making sure the doors were still locked, my uncle started the truck and left right away. He didn't stop driving until he arrived in Illinois, and luckily once there, nothing else happened to him. On the way home, he had to go back through Kentucky, and he would see her on the side of the road every so often. But the moment he crossed back into Tennessee, the weirdness would just stop. He has told me and the rest of my family to never go to Kentucky. He says, every time I go, I see her. It's like some curse that lives and breathes in that hellhole of a state. None of us dare to cross the Kentucky line after hearing this story, and I don't think we ever will. I know it sounds weird, and it's nothing personal against Kentuckians, but please be careful if you're going to Kentucky. It seems the demon picks its victims, and they're almost always truckers. Trucker's Hell, submitted by Orion. This story takes place at a summer camp that I'd go to as a kid. This is actually a story from one of the campers' dads, not my own. The story begins with my friend's dad leaving from a small town in Colorado with his long haul to Idaho. He's a truck driver. He arrives at his first stop like always. He eats some McDonald's like he always does and fills up his truck. He leaves Colorado and prays he'll have a good trip. He enters Wyoming at around 12 that day. There, the winds are very intense, and he's suddenly frightened by something he hears. It sounds like someone is screaming. He looks around and sees nothing, and he gets back in his truck to continue driving. He drives for another half an hour or so, but he hears the same screaming voice. On the road ahead, as he passes by, he sees a woman covered in blood screaming something along the lines of, "You killed me," and points right at him, with blood dripping from her eyes. He looks at the clock. It's 12:45. He's in his truck and just saying to himself that he's just tired, that he needs to get some rest. At the next truck stop, he gets out to go in and grab something to drink, but as soon as he opens the door, the wind slams it shut, and right there before him is the same woman as before. He tries to climb back in the truck and start it, but now it's stalling, and he's 100% convinced that he's a dead man, and right then the clock hit 1 a.m. The truck roars back to life, and the woman is nowhere to be seen. He hauls himself out of there. The rest of his trip to and from his destination goes fine. When he gets back to Colorado, he says he quits his job to his boss. The job was just too stressful and kept him away from the people he loved. He gets married to his girlfriend at the time a year later, and they begin to have a family together. Well, a few years after he quit, his old boss calls one day, telling him that one of their men, who was driving the same road he drove right before quitting, had just been killed. They say that someone ripped his chest open with a hunting knife, writing, "You killed me," on the windshield of his truck. My friend's dad was 24 when this happened, and he told his son to never stay out past midnight because that's when the demons come out, and they're always looking for a victim. The Man at the Truck Stop by Midnight Follower. When I was 16 years old, I lived in a fairly small town. So small, in fact, you could easily walk from one end of the town to another within 30 or 40 minutes. There wasn't much to do on a Saturday night there during the hot summer, and when a close friend of mine called to say a few bands were playing, I jumped at the chance to do something. I quickly got ready and walked to meet her at a gas station across town for some fine truck stop food before the show. During the walk, I had my headphones in, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I would stop to look around, but no one was there. Once I reached the truck stop, my friend Maggie was already waiting inside. I went inside and told her about the weird feeling I had as we grabbed soda, chips, and hot dogs. As we were grabbing those hot dogs, there was a man standing next to the machine. He was extremely tall and was wearing a hoodie. It struck me as odd. It was summer and an extremely hot one that year. He smiled at us and asked, "What are you two doing tonight?" You know, whatever we can around here," Maggie replied. The man said, "Ah, how old are you girls?" 16, why?" I stupidly asked. Wish you guys were older. There's a party going on, and I still might be able to get you in if you're interested." No thanks," Maggie replied. "Are you sure?" he insisted. "You two look pretty hot tonight," he asked in a low voice as he began to walk away. We watched him pay for whatever he had, then he walked out. Feeling a bit creeped out by the guy, we waited around for 10 minutes, then paid for our food and left. As we were walking out of the truck stop entrance, we looked in every direction to make sure the guy was gone, and we didn't see anything. Feeling safe, we began to walk where the bands were playing. The place was packed. We watched the shows and had a good time, and by the time everyone was leaving, the sun was beginning to set, and it was getting dark. Maggie decided to stay the night, so we were starting to head back to my place. When we got there, we were getting settled in for the night. I put in a DVD and we were going to sleep with it playing. A few hours later, I heard movement which woke me up. That's when I saw a dark figure standing outside of my window. Whoever they were, they didn't know that I was awake yet, and they were trying to get the screen off of my window. I screamed as loud as I possibly could. Maggie jumped up and huddled close to me, asking me what happened. But then she was just as petrified when she saw the man at the window as well. As I finally snapped out of it, Maggie as well, we sprinted out of the room, nearly running into my mom, who was running out of her room, who then proceeded to ask us what was going on. We explained as quick as we could what was happening. We locked ourselves in her room as she dialed the police. The house went creepily silent. It only took about 5 minutes, but it seemed like a lifetime. That's a bright side of living in such a small town. The cops make it over pretty fast. When the police came by, the guy was gone, leaving behind a massive hole in the screen in my window, as well as a large kitchen knife. Later on, we were packing up to move out of town, and I couldn't be happier. Except just before we left, someone left flowers at my front door with a note that said, "I can't wait to see you again." Though we never got a good look at him, based on his height, I'm pretty sure that guy was the same one we saw at the truck stop. Luckily, I never saw him again. I graduated at 17 and moved across the country shortly after. Even though it was about 15 years ago, I still find myself locking my doors and windows every night. And to the man at my window, I never want to see you again. Stranger at the Truck Stop by Shay. Before getting into this story, currently where I live, there have been posts on Facebook with people who have claimed to have been approached by people about Bibles and the Word of God. One woman claims she was approached by a female and asked about the Bible. She declined, but then was followed through 4 neighboring towns until she finally pulled over into a police station. She watched the vehicle that had followed her pass by slowly. She saw the woman in the front seat, and in the back, there were several large men staring at her. This took place only 15 minutes where I live. Turns out, they were human traffickers. With that being said, I'm a 20-year-old female who has been doing late-night shifts for the truck stop I work at. Normally, I'd work mornings and never alone, but we're pretty short-staffed, and I'm one of the bosses, so to speak. So I picked up these shifts until we hired new bodies. Now I see a lot of different characters here. Drunk girls coming in asking if they can have a smoke. Teenagers yelling at me for not selling them scratch-offs or Swisher Sweets. You know, the typical gas station kind of stuff. One night, my coworker came in and I was finishing up counting my drawer. I was about to take out the trash after that, so I could clock out and leave for the night. I forgot to mention I'm 5'3", so I definitely don't look too intimidating. This guy that came in the day before, I believe he was from Brazil or Cuba, needed my help with an ATM that we have inside. He had a thick accent and was covered in tattoos. I'm describing this because as I'm finishing up my work, the guy comes in and walks up to the counter. He walks up to my coworker and he asked where he could buy some weed. He's staring at both of us, and I couldn't help but feel that this was a huge red flag. After not getting an answer, he walks out the front door. I finally finish putting the coins into those little dispensers and go over to all of the trashes and start bagging them up. As I'm tying one of the trash cans, one of the ones outside, he comes over to me. "What time are you out?" "Well, whenever I'm finished taking out the trash." "Meet me outside when done. We can smoke and talk." Another red flag. I stared at him and responded, "No thanks, I need to get home after work." He replies, "You can spare 10 minutes, I'll be outside." So this guy I've only ever seen once before is telling me that I have to make time for him. I roll my eyes and take out a round of trash and go back inside to clock out. I was thinking of going out the emergency exit, but perhaps I was acting irrational. I called my then boyfriend and told him what was happening, and he was more paranoid than I was. Neither of us had any idea what to do. I was walking toward the door, and I assumed since I parked my car in front of the store, I could just make a run for it. It would take me all but 5 seconds to get from the door to the car. So I'm at the door, and I can see him standing outside smoking a cigarette right next to my car. Immediately I thought, how in the world did he know that car was mine? Now I'm in full panic mode. I tell my coworker and he's sketched out too, so I waited inside longer and bagged up the little trashes we kept at the register so that it would look like I was still busy. I then go outside and he starts walking the opposite direction towards his car, and I flat out run to mine, unlock it and lock it as soon as the door opens. I then look over to where the man was. He's standing at a van, and 3 different guys are climbing out. Huge guys wearing the same black jackets, and they're all walking towards me. The guy from before is motioning me with his arm angrily for me to get out of my car. At that point, I couldn't help but notice that one of the guys was carrying a pistol. I was terrified, and I peeled out of the parking lot. They climbed back in their van and began to follow me. I was crying. The police station was back the other way, and I was afraid to turn around, so I took them down some back roads I knew of. When I finally lost him, I turned around and made my way to the police station, after which a very nice officer followed me home. Luckily, I haven't seen a trace of that guy or his van. Never have I been so scared in my life. Always check your back seat before you drive. By the Mango. Everything was safer back in the day is something the generations before us always liked to seemingly brag about, as if all the evils in the world have only just manifested. My mother recalls on these times as she drives my best friend and I to the King of Prussia Mall after school one day, stressing stranger danger in the buddy system the entire drive there. My friend and I joke around with my mom, saying how nothing bad has ever happened to us, anyone we know, or even really in this area. It's actually a pretty great and safe place to live. She lets out a loud laugh that ends with a prolonged sigh and reminds us to not be so naive, that danger lurks everywhere, even in an area as beautiful as ours. Girls, she stared at me with an all too serious look in her eyes. You don't know this, but a man tried to take my friend's life in Valley Forge. What? When? I wondered. My friend Gabrielle and I started stammering over each other. We just had to know more at this point. We were both a bit dark, not to mention our houses are literally on the border of the park itself. As my mom begins the story, Gabrielle and I prepare to laugh at what she might call scary, but we really had no idea that this would end up being our go-to "you want to hear a creepy story" tale. During the 70s, on a typical Saturday night, my mom and dad were out partying, drinking, and dancing like their hippie lives depended on it. A friend of theirs was a park ranger for Valley Forge National Historical Park in Pennsylvania, where we live, and part of his pay included housing. That night's party was at their ranger friend's place, a massive stone house from the days of George Washington, with stretches of land before the next ranger's home. Mom and Dad had driven to the party together and met up with their friends, twins Paul and Sarah. After a few hours of partying, Sarah had begun to nag Paul that she was tired, and it was time for the both of them to drive home. Paul, not wanting the night to end just yet, was able to swindle a ride off of my parents so then Sarah could take the car they shared and drive herself home. My mom recalls that Sarah was a bit annoyed with this, as she wanted a driving companion, but they argued that their homes were all within minutes of the park, so that it was pointless, and that Sarah was just being her typical whiny self. She had a bit of a reputation as being stuck up, and my parents saw no reason as to why someone had to accompany her, so Sarah went off alone. Within the first few moments of leaving the forested area, Sarah realized that she's so low on gas that she wouldn't make it the short drive home. Even more annoyed now, she pulled into a small, dimly lit truck stop that was located next to the park. I always found it odd that a National Historic Park had a random gas station by it, but I guess there are main roads that cut through the park itself, so it was necessary. Anyway, while in present-day America, only New Jersey and Oregon have gas attendees that pump gas for you, but back then, it was more common than not for gas attendants in every state to do this. So the attendant came out to Sarah's car, fills it up, and makes some idle chit-chat while doing so. As he finishes up, Sarah turns from the attendant to grab cash from her purse, and when she turns back to face him, she notices his expression seems off, just distant, like he doesn't see that she's sitting there, arms outstretched, overflowing with bills. "You need to come inside to pay," he says quickly, while closing her hand over the money. "What?" Sarah's confused. There's no reason why she'd have to go inside to do that. He can just take the money to the register and it's done. He can even keep the freaking change, she thought. "You need to come inside to pay," he repeated with a much harsher tone. Now you may be thinking, why didn't she just drive away then? Well, I mentioned earlier that Sarah is a bit stuck up. And well, unfortunately, she's not very smart either. She had a follower type of personality that got her into a lot of trouble all throughout her life. Actually, my parents are no longer friends with her because of her attitude, but on that night, that attitude may have saved her. Sarah cautiously exited the car and made her way to the gas station front doors. The attendant kept uncomfortably close to her. At this point, Sarah has no idea what's going to happen, but of course, the worst possible thoughts were running wild in her mind. The second the attendee and Sarah make it through the doors of the station, he springs into the air and launches himself at her, sending the both of them flying behind the main counter and slamming into the ground. He's a huge guy compared to her small frame and is practically crushing her to the point where she can't make a sound. She can't even pick up her arms or legs to hit him. Listen to me," the attendant gasps through forced breaths. "There's a man lying in your back seat." The man sits up and shifts his body so that both himself and Sarah can't be seen through the windows of the store. He then fumbles around the underside of the counter and hits the store's panic button, something to instantly alert the cops that the store is in some sort of trouble. The whole time, Sarah's in a daze. Was there really a man in the car? Why? Were they from the party? What did he want with her? "The guy was holding a knife," the attendant explained to me. I had to get you out of there." Within a few minutes, the parking lot was flooded with red and blue lights. Both cops and park rangers alike had showed up, as I'm sure that was the first and only time that the panic button was ever used. Sarah watched, horrified, as the police pulled a man from the back of her car, someone she had never in her life seen before, and in fact, he had a very large knife in his hand. The attendee later told police that while pumping Sarah's gas, he had seen a glint of light and looked into the back of the car to find the man lying down with the knife pulled close to his chest. He stared back at the attendee and smiled. The attendee was afraid that if he said anything, the man would go into a rage, taking Sarah's life right then and there. Afterwards, Sarah and her family were so shaken up, they preferred to just pretend it never happened. After profusely thanking the superhero gas station attendee, of course, the backseat psycho was released on bail and ended up fleeing the state. My mother and her friends never found out what became of the guy. I heard this story shortly before turning 16. For a year or so, while being a new driver, I always checked my back seats before getting into my car. It petrified me. I'm 24 now, and I get very uneasy remembering this, especially when I'm on the road. You might think this story sounds familiar to an urban legend, but all legends arise from some sort of truth. So remember, don't get in your car until you've checked the back seat. Summertime Stalking by Michelle. I'm 54 years old, and I've got 2 kids of my own. Over the decades, I'd say that I've acquired quite a few interesting stories from my youth. Unfortunately, many of these stories are not the friendliest. I grew up in the city of London, Ontario, Canada, from 1963 up to the early 90s. However, if there was anything at all to say about London at the time, it would be that too many life-threatening people lived there. Stalkers, predators, people who would get a jolly out of taking your life. It was a dangerous place, and it was wise to not get too friendly with anyone. Living in a city like that all your life, you're bound to come across 1 or 2 of them. And unfortunately, I was no exception. I must have been 16. The year was about 1981. At that time it was summer, and I started working at a truck stop and diner just a little ways away from London. It was half a mile away from my parents' convenience store and my house. It was a lovely little establishment, as there were home-cooked meals served every day, and my boss was a wonderful lady who worked her butt off, although her husband was an absolute abusive knobhead. There were about 6 or 7 of us working there at the time. For a while there, I enjoyed the job. The boss and coworkers were very kind to me. The people who came in to eat seemed to enjoy the service as well, and my parents would often come by to order from me. I only worked at the place for about a week or 2. I actually quit, due to a boy the same age as me named Elliot. Elliot was a relatively attractive guy. Tall, blonde hair and blue eyes. Honestly, Disney Prince material, if he wasn't such a huge nutcase. But I didn't know that until it was too late. He worked in the truck and bar area of the building. Out of the whole time I worked there, I only talked to him once, and I mean an actual conversation. And I suppose that was all the time he needed to figure out that I was his brand new obsession, which opened up a can of worms that were endlessly dumped on my head for the next 3 years. You see, during our conversation, it was as if he went into a trance-like state. He started going off about war and morbid topics in the area, and if I'm being completely honest, that was more than enough to convince me to stay away from the guy. Not because he was talking about weird things, but just how quickly and naturally he went on to disgusting topics, staring blankly into nothingness as he described how wicked some of the more disturbing body pictures were, describing some websites he'd found where you could watch supposedly real videos of people being dismembered. I wish I could say that's where the story ended, just me staying far away from this guy. Like most jobs, phone numbers of each one of the staff members were posted on the wall inside the staff room, in case someone needed a shift covered. I guess before I quit, Elliot wrote down my phone number. I say this because before I quit, I began to get strange phone calls from who I assumed at the time was him. Back in the 80s, you couldn't track phone calls since they were landline phones. I was pretty much screwed, and I wasn't even sure if this was something I could tell the cops about. The things he would say on the phone to me are what I can only describe as disturbing. They made my skin crawl. It didn't help that I would get a phone call every time I'd seen him earlier in the day. Even if I may not remember every call word for word, I can certainly remember the way the phone calls would start out. Nearly each one would start out with a man's heavy breathing. Now imagine being home alone, just relaxing after coming back from a day of shopping and picking up a ringing phone, only to hear some deep and heavy breathing. When I was a teenage girl, it was fair to say that it scared me half to death. One of the first instances where it got really creepy was when I was out playing bingo with my folks and a friend of mine. At the time, I was still working at the truck stop. My sister's daughter, who I grew up with, was working in my parents' shop that night, and I had told her if anyone called and asked for me, just tell them that I was out, that I'd be back later to get back to them. Our game of bingo went on normally as bingo in a city full of criminals, alcoholics, and farmers could go. My dad was talking about how stupid bingo was, and my mom didn't really care and just wanted to enjoy herself. My friend and I were holding back the urge to yell back at my dad for yelling at bingo, and believe it or not, we were having a great time. That was my family for you. As fun as it was, on the drive home, it was unavoidable that we'd have to drive past the area where Elliot lived. I just continued watching our surroundings when, out of nowhere, Elliot appeared on his bike and acted as if he was going to head-on collide with us. All of us knew he was a strange guy, but I did not expect him to endanger himself like that. When we got home, my niece explained that Elliot had called a dozen times wanting to talk to me, which I now realize Elliot was riding his bike after having stopped at my house. Long after I quit working at the diner, I was working with one of my friends at a kiosk restaurant in a Walmart that day. One of my coworkers spotted a man hiding in the racks of the ladies' clothing department, which was right across from us. My coworker said, "That guy's been staring over here for quite some time now." I was skeptical and a little bit freaked out. I had no clue what she was talking about until I turned to see Elliot himself hiding in the clothing racks of the ladies' wear. I felt straight up like puking. What was worse was that since there were no buses going out of the area of London that I lived in, I had to thumb a ride home. I ended up getting off early after explaining to my manager what was going on. It wasn't a surprise to me when I got yet another one of his calls. His voice sounded different, like he hadn't drank water in days. It was so raspy you could hardly understand him, but nonetheless, I was mad. "Miss me." He growled darkly into the phone and began to call me vulgar names. I really didn't care for this guy, but it seemed like he was going to follow me everywhere. It was a week after when I finally lost it on him. I was working in my parents' store and he walked in. I recall him buying a drink for himself. That evening, like every normal phone call I got from him, it started off with that heavy breathing. Before this time, I butted in. "Listen, buddy, I know who you are, and I know where you live. Stop calling before I get the cops at your door. Then maybe we can see how you like being harassed." I don't think you could blame me for getting so mad. At that point, it was already publicly known that Elliot was a psycho. He spent most of his time stalking me, until finally, he was caught behind a local pub in downtown London with grenades strapped to his body and intended to set them off on himself inside the pub. Eventually, after he was released for that, he began to shoot up a bunch of low-rent townhouses in the area, aiming to take anyone down with him. And according to records, a baby in a crib got hit and nearly lost its life. A police standoff ensued until Elliot ended himself. Despite the years I was tormented by him as a kid, there is one thing about his passing that makes me a little sad to think about. Nobody attended his funeral. After all these decades, I haven't thought of those 3 years that much. I moved away to British Columbia, and I haven't been back to Ontario at all since 2003, when my dad passed. I know I grew up in some very stressful situations, but I guess I can call it all a learning experience. Dear Woman by Peter Parker. I worked at a truck stop diner for about 5 years, and I've seen and heard a lot of weird things. I guess that's what happens when you work around a lot of truckers. They tend to get lonely and want to talk a lot, and end up sharing a lot of their stories. But oddly enough, at our location, one of the most common stories I heard was about the Deer Woman. Bizarre, right? It's exactly what it sounds like. These truckers all had very similar experiences. They'd be driving on the road. They were getting extremely tired and waiting for a truck stop when they'd see an extremely attractive woman on the side of the road. She'd look the same in every case: medium length, well-kept black hair and light sky blue eyes, the kind of eyes you could see in the night. She would appear to be hitchhiking, give them a smile as they were about to pass by. She would wave at them, but the last thing they felt compelled to do was to stop. Despite her innocent appearance, all these men shared the same emotion during their experiences, and that was immense fear. Now, some of the guys I talked to didn't look back, but one of them did. As he sped away from the woman, he happened to glance in his side view mirror, and what he saw was no longer a woman. Instead, it was something that stood hunched over like some sort of abomination, with antlers protruding from its head. He was too far away then to see it in detail like before, but it was plenty enough to keep him speeding down the road. I'm not here just to share other people's stories, because I had an experience. I think I saw the Deer Woman myself. I was just finishing up work at the truck stop one night. The station is open 24/7, but I always get off at around midnight, depending on how much work I have left. That night wasn't so bad. By 12:05, I was walking toward my car near the edge of the woods in the parking lot. When I made it to the door, searching my pocket for my car keys, I eventually looked up, and that's when I saw her. A woman standing at the edge of the forest. She appeared to be staring up at the moon. I was startled at first because I wasn't expecting to see anyone, but then I spoke up. "Do you need some help, miss?" I asked nervously. She didn't look over at me. Instead, she turned to face the woods and walked into them. And as her lower body came into view, which had been intersecting the top of my car from that perspective, I couldn't breathe. Her legs were deer-like. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. As soon as she disappeared into the woods, I climbed into my car and I drove home. Instead of going to bed like I usually did, I spent a few hours watching TV, trying to clear my mind. I never saw her again. Yet, after that, I hoped I did. Part of me did not believe that what I saw was real, and I needed to prove it to myself. Yet, I never could. So let me say this. If you ever find yourself at a truck stop on an old lonely highway in Nevada, keep your eyes on the road, even if you feel eyes on you from nowhere. Truckers Road, from Backwoods Northwest. I have 2 stories, The first was paranormal and scary for other reasons. The second is scary and involved a trucker legend I'll give you info on when the time comes. Number 1. I was driving OTR, or over the road, last year with a company that required trucks to have 2 drivers. When me and my co-driver met up, we set up a schedule. He would drive days and I would drive nights. For any other trucker reading or listening to this, I do actually like driving at night. I know, maybe that's weird. Moving on to the story, we were taking a load to Oregon from Missouri, driving on I-84 west in Wyoming, near Elks Mountain. It was near midnight, and while the weather wasn't that bad, it could have been better. A little rain and wind, but again, not bad. I'd hit my last fuel stop in the state, got some lunch and rolled on. A little ways down, I saw a truck in the eastbound lane. It was every trucker's dream. A fire engine, red shiny chrome all over. The truck you see when you think of an 18-wheeler. It stuck out for 3 reasons. First, it was the only vehicle heading east on that stretch. Second, it was bright, like it was glowing, or there was a spotlight on it. Third, it had a huge cloud of fog right behind the cab, like it was pulling it along. This cloud stretched to cover the entire interstate, and as soon as the truck passed by, the fog was just gone. I looked in my mirror and didn't see anything. Then, not even 5 miles further, I was in a windstorm. I'm talking 60+ mile-per-hour winds with gusts of 100+, pushing an 80,000-pound truck like it was nothing. As I was fighting to keep my truck on the road, I kept seeing the red one in my mind and thought maybe it was a warning. I yelled over at my co-driver to find the next best place for us to pull off at. 10 minutes and 7 miles later, we were at a rest stop. We stayed there until late morning, all the while fearing the wind would still flip the truck. Finally, at about 10 a.m., the wind died down, and my co-driver took off as we went to the next truck stop for coffee and food. I kid you not, along the way we spotted multiple other rigs on their sides, next to the highway, due to the storm. So for anyone looking to drive across the country, if you see an old red and chrome ghost truck, you might just want to pull off on the next stop. This second story happened this week as of writing this. It also happened on I-84, but in Oregon. The event was when I saw the black dog. Now, some info on the black dog. It's a trucker legend. If you're running yourself into the ground by falsifying your logs or working a second job or something like that, then you'll see the black dog up to 3 times, from what I found out. It's said you see him if you end up falling asleep on the road. It's an omen that a fatal crash is on the way if you don't get off the road. The first time you see it somewhere, it's a warning to change something or stop. The second time, it makes you stop, putting an obstacle in your way or somehow sabotaging your truck to make you come to a stop in a relatively safe manner. The third time you see it, if you can bypass the obstacles or repair your truck and keep pushing on, will be a crash or fatal accident, killing you in some way or another. Now here's my experience. I was driving on I-84 in Oregon, talking to my wife via headset. That's when I saw it. I couldn't make out its features because it was a black smoke cloud running across the road. But the cloud was in the shape of a dog, large enough to stand above the roof of the car in front of me. My immediate reaction was, crap, as a chill ran down my spine and I got a bad gut feeling. My wife heard my reaction and my tone change. I told her I saw the black dog. She instantly knew what I was talking about, and being more superstitious than me, She asked how many times I'd seen it. I told her once, then slowed down and turned my radio off. I began to watch out for another. Luckily, nothing came so far, but further down the road I did see a trooper with lights and sirens going back the way I came, followed by an ambulance. And I began to believe that that dog was not meant for me that day. Trucking has its dangers. From Matthew 64. I've been a trucker almost my whole life. On the road, you're prone to a lot of danger. Even with the amount of experience I've had on the road, it's made me realize you can truly never be ready for the most unexpected situations. I recall a time a few years back where I was making a trip from Seattle to Washington, D.C. I was transporting some sort of computer chips. The trip was around 3,000 miles, and I knew I was in for a ride. The ride was like any other, the same old, same old. Throughout the first day, everything went well. As night approached, the only memorable thing that happened was some sort of accident. I hadn't seen it happen, but I drove past the rubble scattered about the road. 2 trucks and a car. One truck had seemingly veered off the road onto the shoulder, running into a guardrail. Another truck had stayed on the road, but had notable damage on the front end, where the engine was located. What I saw next was the minivan. It had been driven right into by that truck and absolutely crushed from the back end. It was on its side in a ditch by the side of the road. I could only imagine who had been in it. As I drove through the swarm of first responders, I saw people being airlifted, while others had tarps put over them. It was a tragedy, one that I don't intend to get very descriptive with. At this point in time, I had become desensitized to the vision of fatal accidents. I had seen my fair share on the road, and did not look twice as I passed this one. It had begun to get darker at this point, as the night environment settled in. I had no trouble staying awake, but I couldn't brush off this odd feeling I had. That minivan had kept appearing in my mind. I didn't normally have difficulty forgetting about these sort of incidents, but my brain kept involuntarily envisioning what had happened when the truck had driven right into the back of that minivan. I could not shake this sense of sorrow that had come upon me. A recurring thought kept intruding inside my head. Were there children in the back of that minivan? I guess I'd never witnessed anything with a child potentially getting hurt before, so this was a new experience for me. I continued the drive, doing my best to not give any attention to these thoughts. Fast forward about an hour after this, and I'd gotten off at my exit, continuing down a more isolated road. With it being nighttime, the only forms of transportation I saw was the occasional fellow trucker. At some point when I'd been on the road with no other vehicles in sight, I saw something straight ahead on the road. I made them out to be silhouettes. As I came closer, they appeared to be 2 children, their expressionless faces searching deep into my brain. I began to get chills as my head had suddenly become flooded with emotion. The image of that minivan started to surge back into my mind. Every detail of its damage came to me, the blood, the viscera from which lay about the road, along with the rubble, had infested my thoughts. The visions and emotions I held continued to grow worse. Then, it suddenly ceased. As fast as it came over me, it had left. How unexplainable it was that in that brief moment of time I'd felt so much. Along with my thoughts, the 2 children had vanished into thin air, leaving the road once again deserted. I was shaken, I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Not even a minute later, I knew I'd be sleeping that night rather than driving. I would just have to pick up where I left off once I woke up in the morning. I went to a truck stop and I called it a night. But the dream I had that night was extremely vivid. I found myself in a hospital. A child had been admitted into the emergency room, visibly in critical condition. I had only seen one child and questioned where the other one had been. Then it hit me. They didn't make it after the initial impact. As I continued to look on as the doctors crowded around the child, the same intensified emotions swept upon me, and as soon as that happened, I woke up. It was morning. I realized I needed to get back on my route. The day went by fine. Nothing ever happened again with my thoughts or sudden intensified emotions. It's been years since this experience, and I've never had anything quite like that happen since. I still have no idea what took place during that drive, and I've kept it to myself all these years. I figured this would be a good place to share it, if any. The one takeaway from this experience that I've realized is to always be cautious. Don't drive under the influence. Don't drive if you're tired. Don't do anything if you're unsure of what the turnout might be. It's best to play it safe rather than end up in serious injury or death. The events that took place during that period serve as a continuous reminder to me. Radio interference from battle tendency. I used to be a truck driver out of the US. I worked for a company that was hired by all sorts of people to drive shipments between states, or sometimes across the southern border. I had that job for a long time, and 5 years or so in, nothing out of the ordinary happened to me. The scariest thing was probably when some guy at a truck stop retold Phantom 309 like it was his own story, before the waitress gave him heck for it. That all changed in the story I'm about to tell you. It was early July, I believe. Late into the evening and the sun was almost set, but I still had good light, since it was summertime. I planned to put in another couple 100 miles before I pulled over for the night. I was driving down the road, blasting the FM radio as Carry On Wayward Son was playing. I remember it being right around the chorus when the signal began to get iffy. Even though the ground was nice and flat, the radio started cutting in and out. The lyrics would dissipate into static for a few seconds before snapping back in. It continued to get worse as I drove. Thinking that it was a range issue, I started messing with the radio dial. I turned it a few notches, landing it on 88.9. When I did, though, it was all static. No music whatsoever, even though I knew for a fact there was a station on that band earlier. So I swapped back down to the rock station I was on before. Annoyed, I realized that it was just noise too. I gave the dash a bang with my hand, trying to get it to work itself out, but nothing changed. Out of frustration, I cranked the dial all the way to the right, capping it at the highest frequency my receiver could pick up. Then I noticed the static was gone. I relaxed, knowing my radio was picking up something. Oddly enough, even though there was no static, there was also nothing playing either. I checked the volume on it. It was at its normal level. I think then I figured my radio was busted, and I let it stay on, hoping it would magically kick back in eventually. Another 10 minutes went by. The sky had gotten a little darker, but my rig lights gave me all the visibility I needed. I was just getting used to the hum of the engine when, without warning, a sound sputtered out of my radio. It only lasted for a second, a single long tone. The best way I could describe it would be the noise an old-fashioned television plays when it can't find a channel. When it ended, I checked my radio again. Since I knew the receiver had to have picked up that sound from somewhere, I let it keep playing, mostly out of curiosity. Within 30 seconds, the radio made another sound, like the tone from before, but a lower pitch. It lasted for the same amount of time. I was unnerved as it kept playing. As time went on, the gap between the sounds lessened. It was getting to the point where they were playing one after the other consecutively. Thinking some station was doing tests, I decided to switch the receiver to a different frequency. I scrolled the bar pretty far, landing somewhere in the mid-90 range. Interestingly enough, that new station was playing the exact same noise, so I kept scrolling through. Eventually, I got down to the 80s. All the stations were playing the darned robotic tones. At that point, I didn't know what was going on. I was in the middle of the desert. I don't know much about radio, but it didn't seem possible a lone source could be occupying every FM frequency out here. I decided to heck with it. I was a second away from shutting the radio off when the tones cut out entirely. Like, just gone, without warning. The sudden lack of noise made me stop my hand. Then something else came on the radio. Only this time it was a song. It took me a bit to recognize the lyrics. After the third or fourth, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, I realized what it was. Scarborough Fair. It's an old-fashioned English song. To be honest, I don't really know what about. I just remembered as a kid, my parents used to dance to a record of it. Keep in mind, that was back in the late 60s. So there I sat in my cabin, listening to this complete nostalgia trip of a song playing over the radio. The audio had a certain whine to it, like the song was being played off of a record, just like I remembered. The singer was female, with a southern accent. Knowing full well what would happen, I scrolled my radio again. I went all the way up and down the range, and sure enough, the same girl was singing on every single station. It was around this time that I realized I hadn't seen any other vehicles. Sure, it was late, but this was a massive highway, not some back road in the desert. I would have expected to see another driver, a rig like mine or a normal car, but there was nothing whatsoever. I was unnerved, but I kept my eyes on the road, letting the song finish. It seemed to end normally, even though there was something haunting about the voice that sang it. A few seconds after it was over, I noticed something else. This time it wasn't on my radio, but out my window. Out of the driver's side, I could make out the faint outline of something in the night sky. It was maybe 50 feet above the ground, but it was big. I'd say 15 feet in diameter. It looked round from my perspective. It was black as a shadow, so black that it stuck out like a sore thumb against the off-blue sky. I watched it silently as it hovered above the ground. Looking back to my dash for a second, it hit me. My truck was moving at 80 miles per hour, and whatever that thing was, it was keeping pace with me, maintaining the same distance parallel to my truck as I drove down the highway. Getting more and more freaked out, I didn't know what to do, until the radio kicked back in. There was a series of another few tones. I wanted to turn it off, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I felt that if I turned the thing off, I'd anger whatever the heck was out there. So, I didn't. I let it play. Soon enough, more music came on. It only took me a second to realize what it was. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. This track had the same whine as the previous one, again telling me it was being played from a record. The ominous piano of the song was, for the first time, terrifying to me. I decided to look out my window again. and as I watched the shape, I realized it had changed. It seemed to be pulsating along with the song. It wasn't changing color per se. It just looked like the black material of whatever it was got brighter each time a key was struck. Imagine holding a black sheet of construction paper up to a light. That's the best way I could describe it. I think at this point I began to accelerate, exceeding the speed limit, but the thing effortlessly kept pace with me, not falling even an inch behind, as it continued to pulse and glow to the piano of the song. A few minutes in, the music suddenly cut. There was this incredibly unnatural noise on the radio. Again, hard to describe. It was a voice trying to speak English, I think, but it just couldn't get it. Think of a woman trying to speak, then slow it down, distort it, cut its pitch, whatever. It was terrifying. It kept repeating the same syllable over and over. I was frozen as I listened, unable to make sense of it. It was probably said 30 times before I caught on. It was trying to say, being. There was no context. I was clueless as to what it meant, and just as I wrapped my head around the word, the voice stopped. Static returned. The radio buzzed for a second before cutting back in. This time it was so different. Have you ever seen those edits where someone cuts a bunch of different words from various clips and strings them together to make a sentence? It was like that, only the sentence made no sense. A whole bunch of voices, all female, kept saying random numbers and letters, one after the other. A6, L43, Z5, K 886. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I could see the shape pulsing in tune with each syllable as it was spoken through the radio. Then, without warning, it stopped. The radio returned to its static buzzing. Looking to my left, I could see the thing as it followed me, maintaining its speed. Suddenly, it grew in color, changing from a black to a radiating hot white. I couldn't bear to look at it any longer. My entire cabin was lit up. I remember doing my best to not touch the steering wheel as I covered my eyes. I hoped the rig would remain straight on the road long enough for me to recover. And sure enough, it did. Maybe 15 seconds later, I blinked as the darkness of the night was back. I gained control of the truck again. I turned to look outside one last time, and thank God there was no giant black shape hovering in the sky. In its place, though, were heat waves. I could see the deep turquoise of the night sky distorting because of the ridiculously hot air left where that thing had been. I pulled into the next rest stop I saw without hesitation, staying awake all night thinking about this. I could not come up with a single explanation that was realistic enough for me, nor have I been able to all these years. I used to expect some government agent to come sit me down one day and debrief me about the ordeal. But that never happened. Whatever that shape was, I have no clue. How it maintained a good 80 miles per hour without making a sound, I also don't know. But I can reasonably say that the tech involved is far beyond anything we have that's public domain. Maybe it's all some twisted government experiment. I don't know. But I'll leave you with this. I still have dreams from time to time where I'm driving down a big road at night, and that exact woman's voice comes on the radio, singing Scarborough Fair. I always wake up when she finishes the song with, "I must know you're a true love of mine." The Stuff You See and Encounter is a mobile-heavy diesel tech. Submitted by Duo Doerden. As a diesel tech for nearly 11 years officially, and while working with my grandfather and father since I could hold a tool, I've seen quite a few things. As for me, I'm rather average in height, about 5'9", but I'm stocky and built like a logger. I don't chase monsters or mysteries. Most of the time, the mysteries I have are, how the heck did you do that, while trying to fix old, tired, heavy equipment? But as I started working out of my own toolbox and truck, sure, there were some odd people I had to perform miracles to get things to work again, but there were a couple of creepy encounters. One time, I got a call at about 1 in the morning in the winter. A trucker was broke down on a highway about an hour away. Being self-employed, I would take whatever calls and income I could get. I've even taken a few jobs from animal rendering plants, and I had to wear 2 layers of coveralls and rubber gloves, yet that terrible smell still permeated into my hands and clothes, and it took weeks to get it out. Anyway, I drop out there. The call was placed somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Those highways can be pretty quiet that late at night, and it's usually always an inky black night with rain or snow, or a mix of both. It was not hard to find the truck on the side of the road, as it was basically the only thing out there at the time. I pulled in ahead of the truck and backed up so I could get my tools and light equipment close to it. I met the guy, and wow did he smell. Like he had not been in a shower for months, and it was hard to be close to the guy. I asked him my questions, what was going on. Turns out some of the air controls in the cab had broken and were causing a lot of alarms to go off. Being a truck from the early 80s with a sleeper cab, so it has a bed as a part of the cab for long-haul drives, it's definitely bound to happen. So he allows me up in the cab to do my work. I begin taking apart the dashboard to replace the hose fittings and such. Well, remember how I mentioned he smelled badly? Well, the cab was much, much worse. I was gagging and taking gasps, trying not to blow chunks. I tried to finish up quickly. Eventually, I was laying back on the floor of the cab cleaning up my work and such, when I felt something start to rub and roll across my chest, like someone was running a hose across me. I sit up, and it's a freaking python. Never once did he mention there was a python in the cab. I'm not necessarily afraid of snakes, but when something like that is trying to coil around you to get warm, it would freak anyone out. I said my curses and rushed to work faster. The old trucker was laughing at me and watching everything unwind. Then, after he had his giggles, he grabbed the python and put it back in its cage in the back. I finished up and got out, and he said, "You think that was scary? Well, I got body parts in the back." Well, at that point, my heart stopped. I'm on a dark, quiet highway alone with some smelly trucker in the middle of nowhere, and he says something like that. He may have been joking, sure, but I still didn't know why he smelled the way he did. I go back to my truck and take a moment to breathe. I run up the bill on my tablet and go back to the guy. He pulls out his log sheet and his wallet. "Sorry about Bill. He got out and likes to hide in the dash when it's cold. Oh, and don't worry about the body parts. I'm hauling those up to the medical college." I just sighed and got my payment from him, then left. So the guy and his python were body haulers. That's nice. I ask now when a trucker calls me if they have any pets in the cab so I can be ready for it. And later on I found out that guy likes to screw with people, and that's why the local shop gave him my number. Lucky me. My other event was a few years ago. I got a call from a local logging company needing someone to fix some really old equipment that many people don't know how to fix anymore, and they wanted me to fix some of the vandalized equipment they had. It's something of a specialty of mine, fixing old things that people no longer know how to fix. I got the GPS location, and it was deep, deep into the Cascades. I took the long drive up there. At that time, I was carrying a .45 for protection on jobs, as well as an AR. I've had a few close calls with cougars and black bears, so being that far out in the woods, I wanted to be prepared, especially if I had to camp in the mountains. I also had an Arctic sleeping bag, a lot of water, and a couple of MREs just in case. I got to work and tore into the old logging equipment and trucks, stuff repurposed from military surplus it looked like. After a couple of hours, I finished up with my work on the vehicles. It was really late, and the crew was all left for the day, except for the owner, who stayed a bit longer to help me with doing final adjustments. I was packing up and I did my paperwork, and finally the owner had left. We were so far out there that cell phone coverage was really spotty, if there was any at all. I got ready to go as the sun was setting, and well, my truck's battery had given up the ghost. Well, it was too late now to try to get it started, so I prepared for a night of camping in my truck on a logging site. Not that I didn't mind camping or roughing it every once in a while. It's still annoying to be stranded that far from home and civilization. I'm sure you could understand. I got a small fire going with all the scraps of trees and such. There was plenty down here. I sat down on a log next to me and got my MRE cooking in its bag. I could hear deer moving about, small rodents making nests in the down foliage. Owls were hooting and screeching in the night. The crickets and other bugs were singing their songs. It would have been beautiful out there if it hadn't turned so creepy. Because what happened next was all those sounds I just listed completely stopped. All at once, as if someone just pressed the mute button. It was completely silent. The only thing ringing in my ears was the sound of the fire popping and cracking. Keeping my eyes peeled, I slowly finished my food and moved a cut piece of wood so my back was to my truck and chambered my weapons. I grew up hunting. I learned from my elders that when the forest goes quiet, there's some sort of predator in the area. Several hours went by in that night with this insane silence hovering over me. Every so often I'd interrupt it, placing more kindling in the fire to keep it alive. Then, suddenly, off a ways down the mountain from the road, I hear a whistle that sounds like an owl's screech, but it didn't sound right. Then there was another one further up the mountain. At this point, I threw on more wood to try to get the fire to light up more in my area, keeping any wild animals at bay. Plus, I wanted to give myself a buffer zone to see any eye reflections with the fire's light. I gripped my AR tight, and I stood up. Suddenly, masses of rocks began to fly down the mountain, hitting the equipment and at my feet. Many of the rocks were softball size. It even broke some of the glass I had replaced that day. At that point, I let off a few rounds as a warning. Everything stops, and it goes quiet again. No more stones flying down at me. But maybe half an hour later, in the stone-cold darkness, I hear bang, 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 as if someone was taking a wooden bat against a tree. That same noise was also coming from elsewhere above me in the woods, like it was just over the crest of the hill. Then I heard thumping like large, heavy footsteps, and then it would all stop, and the maddening silence would return. I stood there waiting, as if something was about to break from the edge of the fire and start charging at me. Then I noticed two reddish-yellow dots in the hill staring down at me. Something was looking in my direction. I could see them watching me, blinking. I wanted to shoulder my weapon and let loose with the trigger. And then something in me said it's not the one you see you should be worried about. It's the ones you can't see. So I just remained calm and stood there, watching those eyes in the dark, watching me. It felt like I was living a nightmare. I felt so helpless next to a fire armed with a rifle, and feeling like any moment, no matter how many rounds I have, there was nothing I could do to get away. I simply kicked on another piece of a log and continued my staring contest with whatever that thing was. Eventually, the eyes began to move and disappeared behind something and never returned that night. I spent the rest of the night keeping the fire going, watching and listening, and soon, to my great relief, the sounds of the forest returned. When they did, I felt safe enough to crawl into my cab of my service truck and finally get some sleep. Next thing I knew, I was awakened by the owner of the company knocking on my window. I nearly jumped out of the passenger door. He asked me why I was still up here, and I told him that my battery went out and I could not get a cell signal. He then asked me about the few rifle casings I left out there and the broken window. I gave him the full story. He gave me a cup of coffee as he stirred up my fire and got it going. He dragged over another log and sat down on it, and then he gave me his story of another mechanic that had stayed there with them. The mechanic the next day quit and loaded up his camper and never returned to the woods for work. It was the same thing, rocks flying, noises in the forests going quiet. They helped me jump my truck, and I later got going. It was that night that I stayed there that has me staying out of the woods overnight at all costs. I do not do work deep in the woods anymore. Now they either have to bring it to me, or it has to be close to home. Things go down in the woods at night. Certain creatures don't want you around. The Gas Station Trucker. Submitted by Sad Monroe. In early 2014, my family opened a gas station in New Mexico. It was a rinky-dink little convenience store, and it was right in front of the local grocery store, and to the right of it was my mother's salon. I was 14 at the time. I'm 17 now. For being a girl who developed early, I was used to grown men mistaking me for someone of age and flirting with me. But what I experienced working at that gas station was something that keeps me on the edge around truckers and truck stops. During my sophomore year, I was a rebellious child. I'd never show up to school, and if I did go, I would just skip class. To avoid being scolded by my parents, I would offer to cover for my dad at work while he worked on keeping books. It started out as a rare deal, but I ended up never going back to school and becoming the manager. I'd show up to work at 5:45 to give me time to turn on fridges and computers. Once that was done, at 6 I would open the store. I worked there for about 6 months before I started noticing the type of people who come in. There were the regulars who'd get the exact same thing every day, ranging from Gatorade to gas station tornadoes and coffee. Across the way was a truck stop that was always busy and occasionally sending customers to us. I met weird truckers, but there was this one guy that really rubbed me the wrong way. This man was Hispanic. I think he lived in town or in a nearby area, because after seeing him the first time, I began seeing him a lot more. He would always make weird comments about my appearance. "Hey, I really like your leggings," was his most famous. Every time I heard him say it, I would cover the rest of my body in one of those uncomfortable arms crossed positions, but he would just smile bigger, laugh, then walk away. One morning, my parents were out of town, and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to head to work early to start the morning cleaning process. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a semi parked behind my mom's salon. Note that the alley behind the salon wasn't large enough for vehicles to go through, let alone a semi, and it was a dead end. I didn't think much of it, so I continued to open the store and make coffee and start the day. About 20 minutes later, I heard a tapping on the glass door. I'm not easily scared, but I have severe anxiety which gives me abort mission signals constantly. So when I get them, I have no choice but to brush them off and keep working. I turned my head, and I saw the trucker that had been giving me a weird feeling. Now I don't open the door unless my coworker, who is a close friend to me, shows up, but I decided to open the door anyway. He asked as usual, "Hi, how are you today?" and other common greetings. Then he continued around the store, gathering things. He finally brought them up to the counter and I began to scan the snacks and energy drinks. I was almost finished when he started to lean over the counter. The counter was about waist high, and I'm 5'3", so he towered over it. He kept leaning, and I looked at him with a disgusted face, which drew him back. Then he complimented my thighs and my leggings. This time he didn't laugh then leave like he usually did. He kept talking, but the thing that sent alarms and red flags through the sky is when he said, "You're very beautiful, you know. You should come work with me." I forced out a fake laugh, but I was obviously very uncomfortable. He would moan to himself, and as he was gathering his things, my coworker walked in. I asked her to watch the counter as I used the restroom. Apparently, as I went to the bathroom, he kept asking her about me, asking my work schedule, what time I got off on what days, but as a grown woman herself, she saw the red flags flying as well. She told him off and threatened to call the cops if he came around me, yelling about how I'm just a minor and how he was vile. I never had to come face to face with him again, but I would still often notice his truck parked outside the building, knowing he was still watching me. It was then that I began to feel scared to go to work. I even brought up to my parents that men were making advances on me, and it made me feel unsafe. I was told to take it as a compliment. But the stories of truckers taking women started to circulate through our gas station employees, who recommended me to stop working alone, as my friend who had saved me that time had children and was rarely ever there anymore. Eventually, a man was found in his semi across the street, no longer alive. He had OD'd. I never knew who it was, but I did always find it curious that around the time that happened, I stopped seeing that man and his truck. I no longer work there, and I'll probably never work at another gas station again, because I always felt that that guy was more places than I noticed. I don't dislike truckers, I just don't like creeps that use the job to their advantage, and unfortunately, my parents didn't care enough about my well-being and safety. I'm just glad that my coworker stepped in to protect me, because who knows what he would have done if she wasn't there. Maybe he would have waited for me to clock out. What if one day he didn't just watch me from his truck? I'm glad I didn't have to find out. To all the girls out there, be safe, travel in groups, and you don't have to be friendly to someone who makes you severely uncomfortable. The Boy Walking in the Ditch, submitted by Gina D. I've been a long-haul trucker for 5 years now, and while I've met plenty of drivers with their own creepy stories, I hadn't really gone through anything crazy before now. I was hauling popcorn in Georgia, and sometimes we load in pretty desolate places. This particular farm was about an hour's drive from Atlanta. It was far, really far from civilization, and I was beginning to think my GPS was leading me in circles. Everything looked the same, and it was getting dark when I saw something I definitely have never seen before. There was a little boy that couldn't have been more than 5 years old, crying and waving me down from the ditch, mouthing the words, "Please stop." I slowed down quite a ways away from the kid. I felt bad for him, but at the same time something felt completely wrong. There was nothing but woods around here. No houses, no cars that I could see, just a kid standing in the middle of nowhere. I immediately called the cops to report it, and they made sure to get my exact location and told me to stay in the truck and watch the child. Yet, I was still torn between listening to my gut and helping the defenseless child. I'm glad I listened and stayed in the truck though, as cowardly as that sounds. He was looking around frantically, still crying but not coming towards my vehicle. The police responded surprisingly fast, as to be expected when there's a child involved, and as the sirens came into earshot, 2 all-black Escalades came out of the woods and booked it away from there. The police that arrived grabbed the kid and began to pursue the Escalades. The one with the kid came to my truck first and talked to me. He explained it to me, that what I just witnessed was a gang initiation and that the little boy was bait, and I had nearly taken it. I gave my statement, but I didn't get any more answers beyond that. The kid himself was terrified but unhurt. He and I were both lucky to leave the desolate, unforgiving back road alive that night. One Headlight, submitted by Snacks. I often travel between cities in Southern California. My best friend lives 70 miles away from my hometown, but thanks to freeways, it's usually only an hour drive. Since traffic is insane in the LA area, I fell into the habit of only making the commute in the middle of the night. At 3 a.m., the only people on the road are usually truckers, and sparsely a few cars. I don't have to concentrate too hard, and I can catch up on my podcasts. My parents were always uncomfortable with me driving such a distance alone in the wee hours of the morning, but I always shrugged it off as the usual parental paranoia. Until one night. I had told my parents I was going to be home by midnight that night. I had work in the morning, so my fun-filled weekend with my best friend had to come to an end. But I pushed it. 11, 12, 1 in the morning. All passed me by as we shoveled chips into our faces and watched funny YouTube videos together. When it was about 2:15 in the morning, I finally decided it was time to head out. My parents were probably asleep anyway, and didn't even know I was coming home so late. My friend was getting really tired as well, and instead of walking me out to my car like she usually did, she fell asleep. I stepped out the door and onto the porch. My friend lives in a nice and relatively safe suburb, and I'd walked around it at this hour of night plenty of times, so I wasn't frightened at the least. I threw my bag into the back of my little sedan parked on the street, and I climbed into the driver's seat. After buckling up, turning on the engine, and picking a fitting podcast for my journey home, I looked up from my phone to find I was suddenly blocked in. Next to my car, a truck had pulled in close, trapping me in my parking spot. It was a big white work truck. It wasn't beat up per se, but it showed its age. It looked to be from the late 90s. The thing that caught my eye about the vehicle was the fact that its right headlight was burned out. Before I could take in more of the vehicle, the passenger window rolled down, and I could see the driver lean out from the darkness of the cab and look down at me, into the orange streetlight. He looked to be in his 40s. He was short, fat, and very greasy. He was balding, but what was left on his head was messy locks of oily black hair. He gave me a yellowed smile and motioned for me to roll my window down. Like an idiot, I did. "Do you know how to get to Victory Boulevard from here?" he asked in a voice accented with phlegm. I thought it was kind of a silly question, as Victory is one of the easiest streets to find in the area, but I was nice and pointed the way down the road. "Yeah, it's just about 3 blocks down that way. You can't miss it." He seemed satisfied with that answer, but before rolling up his window and driving off, he said something that unsettled me. "Stay safe, you hear? It's dangerous late at night for pretty girls like yourself." With that, he drove off, and I figured he was gone for good. I took that moment to lock my doors and text my friend about the guy before leaving. I finally got on the road, but before it was even out of the neighborhood, I looked into my rearview mirror to see that a truck was following me out. My blood went icy. It was the same big truck from before, with the one headlight. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my mind down. Maybe he didn't follow my directions and got turned around. Maybe he was just following me out of the neighborhood in the hope that I would lead him to the street he was looking for. I glanced in the mirror again. I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew they were on me. Luckily, I had to pass over Victory to get to the freeway home. With a bit of luck, I would get him to the street he needed. Then he would turn off into the night. Tensely, I pulled up to Victory Boulevard. Even at 2:30 in the morning, it was a red light. The truck was still behind me. When I got the green to go, I laid on the gas and continued down the road past the intersection. But to my terror, there was that one headlight still, riding my bumper now, leaving the road he had supposedly been looking for behind him. My stomach was down to my feet at this point, but my only option now was to get on the freeway and try to lose him in the next 70 miles. I pulled up on the ramp, and he was still right behind me. I floored it once I hit the freeway proper, hoping there would be enough traffic for me to shake him off. Unfortunately, it was my ideal condition on the road. There were only a couple Big Mac trucks making late-night long hauls, and less than a handful of other private vehicles. So, there was nowhere to hide. I spent the next 30 minutes weaving in and out of what little traffic there was, but it was no use. Every time I looked back, there was that one headlight staring right back at me. On a sign of upcoming off-ramps, I saw a name I recognized. It was the same off-ramp that another friend of mine's ex-boyfriend had lived off of. I'd taken her back and forth a bunch of times, so I knew one thing was sure. There would be lots of twisty and confusing suburban streets there, and I started to form a plan. At the last minute possible, I veered off the freeway and onto the off-ramp. The truck screeched after me. I ran a traffic light, and that gave me enough time to quickly turn a corner into a neighborhood. I spent 5 minutes whipping around the sleepy house-lined streets and getting myself as lost as possible. Then I parked on the side of the road, caught my breath for a moment. A few minutes passed, and there was no signs of him. The feeling of relief was like no other. I started the car again and pulled out of the neighborhood, back toward the freeway to finish my journey home. As I was sitting at the light, waiting to turn onto the ramp, when I looked across the road, my whole body froze. On the other side of the intersection was a white truck with one headlight. How did he know I was trying to trick him? Then I remembered the license plate frame on the back of my car, with the name of my hometown in huge white letters. He knew exactly where I was going. The light changed, and I pulled back onto the freeway, one headlight shining in my rear-view mirror. I had to formulate a new plan if I was going to get away from him. I figured I could take my usual exit to get home, but instead drive to the local police station, where I'd be safe. No one in their right mind would try anything at a police station. If he was still following me, I could get the cops on my side no problem. I gripped the steering wheel, resolved in my plan, and drove. The traffic had grown a little thicker than before, so I continued my weaving in and out of lanes, which I'm sure the other drivers loved. I glanced back at my mirror and noticed the truck was a distance back now, behind some other cars. As minutes went on, he was further and further away until I couldn't see him at all. By the time I got to my home exit, he was nowhere in sight. I pulled down a side street after getting off the freeway, and I parked just to see nothing. My only guess was that the old truck didn't have the gas to make it the full way. Whatever happened, I'm relieved it did. Anyone that determined to stalk a girl at night in her car for almost 70 miles is not someone I want to encounter without a car around me. I drove home, and the first thing I did was fling myself into my mother's arms. She had been awake and worried sick. She was going to give me an earful for being so late, but when she saw I was crying, she just hugged me and let me tell her what happened to me. After hearing my story, she figured the terror I experienced was enough punishment. Be wary of the night. I still make my 3 a.m. drives, but now there's an edge of caution in my stomach at all times. Sometimes, I swear, in the middle of the night on the freeway, just a few cars behind me, I see that one headlight. A Trucker's Weird Story, submitted by Anon. My father was 37 years old. I was only 3 at the time. My parents divorced when I was 1. Back then, my dad was working as a truck driver in Iowa, and this is a story he later told me about one of the most bizarre things he'd ever witnessed. He got a call from his truck company to pick up a shipping container at a farm. He drove out to the farm to pick it up. When he arrived, he saw 3 unmarked cars that appeared to be for federal agents. He hooked up the container and the cars followed him. He was required to drop the container at a military base in Nevada. He can only stop for fuel and bathroom breaks. They even gave him clearance to skip any and all way stations, which was beyond weird for a trucker. A couple of times local police cars tried to pull him over, but the Secret Service cars stopped the police, and then they'd be back on their way in no time. Once he arrived at the base, he noticed there were twice as many federal vehicles compared to when he started the journey. They then had him get out of the truck, after which a different driver got in the truck, drove it into a dirt hole, and buried the truck in its entirety. The cab and everything, which luckily he didn't own the cab. He doesn't know what was inside the truck, and I don't think he ever wanted to know. I'm 15, and this story scares the crap out of me, thinking about what was so important in that container that the entire truck had to be buried confidentially after being escorted by dozens of Secret Service agents. You may not like it, but some very weird things are going on. Oh my God. From Country 1989. This happened in 2009. I've been driving trucks for a while, and the story I'm sharing now takes the cake for all the bizarre things that I've seen. In 2009, I was hauling mostly hopper bottoms, some blood powder, some bone meal, even a few DG-13 corn runs. But every once in a great moon, I'll pull a wagon or livestock trailer. On this occasion, I was hauling a load of late feeder calves for a feedlot out of Indiana. I was going to West Virginia. The destination was a rural farm in Wolfe County. We made it there just fine, me and the mini steak family in the back. After unloading, oddly enough, the farmer asked me to do a big favor. I replied, "What do you got in mind?" He said he's got a couple of dead pigs that need gone. So he asked me to haul them off to a local rendering plant, and to convince me further, he offered a few extra Benjamins for the extra time. I agreed to do it. It was already in the direction I was heading back. Plus, extra money is nice. So he helped me throw the 2 dead pinks in the back. Then I went back on the road. Later in the night, I stopped off the narrow 2-lane road into an old gravel pit. It was one of those old side road gravel lots that state boys throw their toys into while they continue their road to work. By then it was about 11:30 p.m. Me and Gunny, my blue-nosed pit bull, needed some rest, and I needed to work on my logbook first. Where we stopped, for some reason, I got a bad vibe all over my body, and even for Gunny, who was starting to act strange. At the moment, I thought maybe we should head down the road a little bit to see if there was something better, or at least not as weird. But as I was so tired, I reminded myself that I've stayed in worse blocks back in Chicago. Plus, I didn't want to run into any police curious about my logs, so we hopped in the bunk and fell asleep. 2 hours later, I hear a bang and a clank. I fly up, shouting curses. Gunny is perched up tail between his legs, growling but obviously scared. He's showing his teeth. The entire time the truck is rocking back and forth. There's something in the trailer being moved around. I immediately think that someone or something is trying to break into the trailer. Moments later, it all stops. My windows were down at the time to let the breeze in, so I could stay cool without running the truck. I know what you're thinking. Windows down in the spooky woods. What a bad idea. I crawled back up to the driver's seat to check things out. I turn the keys back and proceed to start rolling the windows back up. In this truck, the driver's side window goes up faster, so I watched it go up first, and then I went to the other side to watch it go up even slower. And when I did, Gunny jumped in my lap, barking and showing his teeth again. When I looked over where the window was, there was a face there. There were eyes looking back at me. The thing's head was huge, and its face was like a dog's but twice as large. Its ears were covered in hair, with shagged hair covering its body. Its teeth were absolutely huge too. There was row after row of stained yellow teeth. I saw him pull his head back, then lean into the window. I swear to God the creature smirked at me, then began to growl. Then, with human-like fingers, it started to tap its nail on the glass. The whole time Gunny is going crazy. The animal outside suddenly decides that it's had enough. It turns and walks away slowly. By then, I'm desperately trying to get the truck out of there, to get away from this thing. I turned the headlights on and pulled backward. When I did, I saw how big this thing was. It was at least 8 feet tall, with a body like some bodybuilder. Its fur was all long and mangy and black, with some parts being crimson red, like they were stained from blood. Its legs were all bent backward like a dog's legs, and its tail was bushy like a wolf. Dragging along the ground behind it was one of the dead pigs that I had in the trailer. When I looked more closely, there was another one of those creatures, and it was dragging the other pig behind it. The one in the back housed something fierce. It vibrated the metal of the rig, causing me to shudder, and my dog wet himself. To his defense, my dog was in my lap, so it could have been me that did that. We hightailed it out of there, driving another 45 miles to a different truck stop. I get out to check the trailer. My roll door was halfway bent out. These roll gates are meant to hold cows up to 1,500 pounds, but these things bent it. All I'm saying is this whole thing was unreal. For weeks, then months, then years, I coped with the logic of it all, not understanding it, but still knowing that it really all happened. I've run that same route hundreds of times since, but I'll never stop near that road. 2 months back, I was going through that stretch of highway. They've got a little gas station down there, and one time, before I made it to my destination, my truck was acting up and the engine light came on, so I stopped there for a moment to check if everything was good. I went inside and the clerk said, "Everything good?" All I could say was, "Glad I didn't break down 2 miles back there." I smiled, grabbed a can of Skull, and was off like a dirty shirt. Makes me think, those bumps in the night, they're more than just wind or your house settling.
Wicked Warning. From Lady Rain AK. Location, New Orleans. I was trucking down in the States with my ex. We had traveled coast to coast and had many weird experiences along the way. But this experience was rather freaky and possibly paranormal. It happened in New Orleans at the beginning of August 2005. We had finally made it to New Orleans, the home of voodoo and Mardi Gras. Ever since my brother told me about their graveyards, the voodoo shops, and the other strange but fun things down there, I had to go see it for myself. Call it morbid curiosity or just simply fascination with the macabre. Either way, I wanted to go. I heard the mausoleums and headstones are beautiful, and the local lore had me interested. Not to mention, I had just gotten a new 35mm camera, and I had taken a few photography classes in high school, so I wanted to capture the memories in the best way I knew how. I know 35mm was old school even back in 2005, but there was something about not knowing immediately how the shot would come out, not having instant gratification, that made me feel like I was some sort of real artist. We had dropped the trailer at the Home Depot we were unloading at, and drove down to Lafayette Cemetery. We zigged and zagged through the streets in complete awe of the old plantation-style homes. There was this one ginormous home in particular that looked like it could house at least half a football team. The place was utterly beautiful, but something about it made me feel uneasy. I'm sure a lot of horrible things happened down there, so we didn't stop, and we drove right on by. My ex did not, and I mean did not, like anything unknown, anything spiritual, or mildly occult-like, so he flat out refused to go with me, stating it was boring, but I could see that he was actually creeped out. Pulling into a nearly empty street, I had half expected there to be tons of people there, as what I had gathered this was supposed to be a tourist attraction. Since it was a residential area, we couldn't park the bobtail truck here. He tossed me my cell phone, which had like 15 minutes of prepaid call time left, and said to call him when I was done. He basically dropped me off at the gate and sped away like a complete chicken. The mausoleums looked like finely built homes, sitting there on stone pads, some of them growing moss and others had fresh flowers at their stoops. Walking the stone paths that weaved through the hollow ground, there was a complete ominous feeling, like I was being followed. It filled me with dread and excitement. The hairs on my neck stood up, and a chill ran through my body, causing my very existence to run cold. It was borderline 90 degrees outside, but I was shivering. I continued along the path, clicking away on my camera, taking pictures here and there of the weeping cherub angels and the praying figures that marked the headstones. I must have lost track of time, as the sun was beginning to dip down over a particularly unnerving set of trees. I had forgotten we were in the south, and the possibility of a snake or something just as freaky falling on that tree dawned on me, and I began to make my way back to the gate. The towering gate looked even more sinister in the dimming light. I quickened my pace, and soon spotted a lady of African descent. She was probably nearing 80 years old, and appeared very frail-looking with a bright-colored outfit, and her gray hair peeked out of a bandana-type headdress. Necklaces of what appeared to be wood or possibly bone were draped around her neck. I must have startled the poor woman, because she snapped her head towards my direction in such a swift movement. I was nearly startled myself. I was surprised she didn't break her neck. She was looking at me straight in the face now. I noticed then that she had one milky eye. The other was darting back and forth like it was searching for something to focus on. She had appeared so quickly, I was visibly shaken. She probably sensed my fear. I rationalized with myself that it was totally possible she was leaning down to put flowers on the nearby grave, but as I got closer to where she was, I didn't see any flowers. She motioned for me to come over, and despite my gut feeling, I walked cautiously over to where she stood. I assumed she simply needed help getting up or help to her car or something. I was trying to be the good citizen and get my good karma points for the day. I thought that I was far enough away that if for some reason I needed to bolt, I could, but I was apparently within arm's length of her now. She was swifter than a freaking lion when she grabbed me by the arm so tight that she left bruises on my forearm. Her nails dug into my skin, but I could barely let out more than a squeak of terror. She pulled me towards her leathery face and milky eye. Her good eye was almost solid black. The whites that were left had yellowed over time. Small serpents of red slithered across her face. She smelled of rotting leaves and iron. She smelled like decay. She spoke in a very deep, I've smoked 3 packs a day for 40 years deep, raspy voice, saying, "Get out." "Excuse me? This is a public place, right? I'm just visiting, I don't mean any harm," I managed to say to her. Pulling me closer to her face, I could see her gnarly, snarled teeth. The few that were left were tobacco-stained and barely hanging on for dear life. Her hot breath was pungent. I swallowed back a gag. "Leave this place, or you will drown for your sins. I then hear off in the distance.
Hello? Are you there? Do you need me to come pick you up?
I had a ninja grip on my phone, apparently, which I had subconsciously dug from my bag in a panic, while the old lady had me in her clutches. I didn't remember entering his number though, and we didn't have each other's numbers on speed dial, so the fact that my ex was on the other line was a blessing in disguise. Just as quickly as she snatched me, she let me go, almost forcibly throwing me to the ground. She was surprisingly strong for someone who appeared to be so frail. I walked to the outside gate, waiting on the curb for my ex to come around the corner. It was getting much darker, and the chirping of crickets started off in the distance. I could still see the lady pacing back and forth at the grave. She was watching me. Her mouth was still moving like she was talking to herself or perhaps cursing me. The chicken lights of the truck came into view, and I was finally safe. The hero of the story showed up on his white horse to save me. Or in this case, the Yahoo in a purple bobtail Peterbilt jerked to an abrupt stop as I nearly jumped into the street to get away from that cemetery. I flung the door open in one fell swoop, and I hopped into the front seat, slamming the door shut. Looking confused, my ex asked me if I was okay, why I looked so scared. Then a wry smile formed on his face as he began to poke fun at me, saying that I was the one getting scared, that I was afraid of the dark. He told me he knew it was a bad idea to visit the place of those that had passed. I told him what had happened with the old lady and exclaimed, "Heck yeah, I was scared. That old woman was freaky." He looked at me blankly and asked, "What lady?" Then he motioned toward the gate. The woman was gone, as if within the past few seconds she vanished. There were no other cars in the street, and it was empty besides the idling semi-truck we were in. There was only one way in and out, and we were parked right in front of it. If anyone would have come through the gate, we would have seen them. I stressed to my ex we needed to leave the state, telling him the old lady had warned me. But he didn't believe it, but went along with it as we headed out of the south. After that, we ended up stopping in Georgia and even in Northern California at one point, then along to Biloxi, Mississippi. And within those 2 weeks of almost constant driving, Hurricane Katrina hit. Maybe the old woman was right. Had I not listened to her in the Lafayette Cemetery, we may have very well been casualties to Hurricane Katrina. Truck stop horror. Another experience from Lady Rain, AK. Location: roads across America. I lived in a small town, and I never really traveled outside of my home state. I never experienced life in a way that others would. We were kind of sheltered from the big crime and other things that had been happening over the countryside. So my now ex decided to take me on a journey of being an over-the-road truck driver. In a lot of cases, this was a great experience. There were a lot of fun times, and I got to see most of the United States. But trucking life is hard, and being on the road 24/7 is not easy. Being cooped up in a small truck with someone for that long will cause anyone to become mad, as in bat crap crazy. Life on the road is much different now than it was when I was trucking. People now have better tech and the ability to binge watch your favorite YouTube channel, surf the web, or play games on your phone to keep yourself occupied. The only forms of entertainment we had back then was either watching one of the dozen or so DVDs, reading yet another book, or talking on the radio. We often opted for talking on the radio, which became our version of social media. We even had different identities or personas to hide behind while interacting with the different people who were basically strangers to us, and I think we all know how creepy certain truckers can be. We kept a bit of anonymity on our side to stay safe on the road. When you're a trucker, you acquire a CB handle. My ex's was Ninja Dwarf, and mine was Northern Exposure, as I was from Alaska. During the time on the road, you meet a lot of crazy people, and you see a ton of crazy stuff, and I do mean a ton. People often hear about stories of things that happen on the road. Most of them are more gross than scary. You know, like drivers getting a little too friendly with their cabin buddy, whether it's a dog, a cat, or even a goat. Because yeah, crazy stuff happens on the road. And I saw it by accident firsthand a few times. But those are stories for a different time. This time was one of the most terrifying experiences of my entire life. When it comes to strange and unusual events, this world is full of them, and I got lucky enough to be a part of it. Have you ever gotten the heebie-jeebies from someone's voice? Like flat out scared to talk to someone. A voice that makes you think that the person on the other line is not at all there, you know. That was this guy. Something about him just made my skin crawl, and I had only ever heard his voice through the crackle of the CB radio. The CB started to crackle and we heard the distant call. You could barely hear a voice through the static, but eventually he got close enough we could hear him clearly. He must have been 50 miles or so behind us, because it was still faint, but our CB radio was peaked and tweaked, meaning it could really reach out and touch someone, kind of like when everyone's got 3G and you're running 5G. We could just barely hear him through the chatter of the CB. And then I finally really heard his voice. It's hard to explain, but the best way I could now describe it would be like how Heath Ledger talks as the Joker in the Batman movie. Like a slurred voice through gritted teeth that had been smiling for hours. There was something just off about it, and it gave me chills. He said to us,
"Hey there, Purple Pete,"
which was the color of our truck.
"Where you headed?"
My ex hollered back that we were heading to Arkansas. The driver said he was going the same way and asked if he could tag along, and introduced himself as Maniac. We would run from one coast to another, then back again. This guy always seemed to be running the same route as us, but we had never physically seen his truck, though he described it as a 378 long-nosed Peterbilt that was black and had a brow and a cattle guard. According to him, he ran dry box from California to Florida, which explained why he always seemed to be either coming or going on the I-10. One week when we were running from Florida back to LA, we actually caught up to him on his back trip from Redmond, Washington to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He told us he would meet up with us in Nevada when we did our trip back, because by then we would have run out of hours and needed to take a rest. We said sure to him, even though I really did not want to meet this guy. But my ex seemed to really like him, so we gave him an ETA on when we'd be back in that area and what truck stop we would be at. We were going to meet up with him for a meal. This was really before the idea of having a cell phone for anything other than emergencies, so it wasn't like we could just call him when we were going to be in the area. He agreed and we parted ways. My ex continued to talk to him until the radios would no longer reach. We had finished our load that day and were heading back to Las Vegas to the truck stop, the one we had agreed upon, and waited. Las Vegas is a shady place for truckers in general. There's often quite a bit of crime there. I've seen my fair share of cops live while in truck stops, and I mean right in front of my face. Watching them do sting operations is pretty entertaining to say the least. We waited in the truck for what seemed like forever, until we got bored and ventured into the truck stop for a bit. We waited and waited until eventually we passed enough time where we could take another load, so we had to head out. We never actually met up with the guy in Nevada. But a few months later, we ran into him in Oklahoma. We had heard some chatter on the radio about these lot lizards, truck stop girls you could pay for, if you catch my drift, whose lives had been brutally stolen at truck stops in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. Folks on the radio chalked it up to drama, but at the time, none of us had anything better to do than make up truck driver stories. We kept hearing about it though, and even brought it up to Maniac the next time we heard from him. I remember he laughed about it,
must be one real sicko doing it. Must just be a story, because if it was true, they would have caught him already. I'm sure there's tons of fingerprints and fluids at the crime scene. With as messy as the crime scenes were, I'm sure he wants to be caught.
That seemed like a really weird thing to say, but he was a very weird guy, so that was totally in character for Maniac. Maniac went his way and we went ours, and after a while I forgot about the weird comment. Fast forward a few weeks later, we were in Mississippi and we hear a familiar voice on the radio, and it was Maniac. We had taken a long weekend because it was Labor Day, and most companies were okay with drivers taking an extra day off then. Our plan was to make it to this lake out in the middle of nowhere. We were going to drop our trailer off and head out bobtail. So we chatted with Maniac, and he said he was going to Tennessee and that he would be heading out the next morning. And so, cutting our much-needed break short and bypassing the weekend at the lake, my ex decided to run with him so that there was someone to talk to. We had gotten into an argument earlier and I wasn't talking to him, and he absolutely hated the silent treatment. They chatted and I tried to ignore the conversations, but I couldn't help but overhear that the topic changed to the truck stop lot lizards. My ex tried to be a hard A, and he straight up told Maniac that he wasn't scared of the guy, and that he could defend himself from a sicko like him. But then I remember hearing him say,
It's not you he's after.
He said it with this raspy chuckle, and then they quickly changed the subject. Our load was to be delivered in North Carolina in a few days, so being a few hours ahead of the deadline just meant we would be at the top of the line to pick up our load. It was a win-win. We left the following morning. The guys decided we would stop in Tennessee and finally meet each other. All this after 6 months of chatting. By then we weren't so afraid to meet up with the guy. Except for me. I was still very on edge about it. I was no slouch, and I grew up with 15 boys in the house. It was a big household, and I was quite the fighter because I had to be. My ex was a larger dude too, standing 6'3" and about 280 pounds. So in theory, we were ready for anything. The only way someone could get the best of us is if they were prepared or armed, which back then was highly illegal to have in the trucks, and if you were caught by the Department of Transportation, it would be jail time, no questions asked. With our company, we had very specific fuel stations we could use to top off at, but Maniac was an owner-operator, so he could go anywhere. Maniac said he'd already stopped to get fuel and took a shower, but he would drop his trailer off and meet us at a Flying J patrol station that was down the road from where he was, which I believe was a Love's fuel station. So we get ready to fuel up and we showered, then we got a booth at the restaurant. We waited about 45 minutes before ordering food. Once more we waited and waited. No one ever showed up, and there was no way to contact him besides getting close enough to him over the CB radio, which at this point was going to be random. My ex was not a patient man, so we ate and headed back out to the truck. You could tell too that he was obviously irritated with being stood up for a second time by the same guy that claimed to be his friend. I remember it being a dark and humid night. It was probably 10 p.m. There wasn't much for noise in the truck stop, which was unnerving. A quiet truck stop is a creepy truck stop. We walked across the fuel island to be greeted to a crap ton of flashing lights. Several cops, state troopers, a coroner's van, a fire truck, and 2 ambulances. All of which, if they had lights, they were flashing. It was quite the spectacle, and completely unexpected. It's not uncommon for either lizards to get busted or drivers to get involved in crap they are not supposed to, so we didn't think much of it. Cops and a truck stop go hand in hand after all, but this was more than just your typical truck stop shenanigans. Something major was going down, and the truck stop was now suddenly abuzz. We passed 12 trucks or so. This was one of the bigger Flying J's, so it could probably fit about 80 trucks and trailers in the lot if you went all the way back to the dirt. And then you could probably Tetris a dozen or so trucks in the dirt lot, which happened to be where our truck was. Now, I'm a curvy girl, and I wouldn't call myself fat, but I definitely don't look like I belong in a truck stop. I was used to drivers looking at me all creepy-like. I always got taunted and harassed for being a lot lizard even though I was a driver. In fact, there are some truck stops that are not safe for me to walk in alone. I was walking with my ex, and we weren't holding hands or anything, but it was obvious that I was with him. We walked down a row and saw a bobtail truck parked in a full parking spot. I thought it was weird as he had no trailer, but he was in a spot for one. Typically, bobtail trucks will park at the end of a run and leave the big spaces for trucks with trailers, because that was again another unspoken truck driver rule. We moved by the bobtail truck. It was a dark truck, maybe a dark black or blue with a cattle guard and a brow. I don't remember seeing what type of truck it was. Old school trucker code was if you were looking for company, the driver would park and leave his reading red light on to tell lot lizards that the driver was looking for entertainment. The guy was sitting in the passenger seat, and he had the red reading light on, so I could see his face. It was a bit distorted, but he gave me the creepiest smile, and then quickly shut his blinds. We were about 6 trucks down from the bobtail. I could see his truck from ours, and I remember looking back and seeing the red light still illuminating through the porthole window in the passenger door. There was a small slit down the curtain showing a dark spot, and I could see eyes. The guy in the truck was still watching us. Even with as warm as it was, chills flew up my spine, and I felt uneasy. My gut wrenched with a sudden feeling of dread. I honestly thought I was going to get sick. We finally got back to the truck and turned on the CB for our night of entertainment, and to see if we could radio Maniac to see what the deal was in the lot. The chatter was about all the cops and the ambulance, fire truck, and DOT. All the commotion seemed to be across from us, but 2 rows up. People were saying that they found a body, a lot lizard, and that it was bad, like gnarly and brutal. One driver started trying to explain it, but he was then told that he had to keep his mouth shut by a police officer. Being nosy, though, my ex and I jumped out of the truck to go investigate. We dodged in and out of the trucks and managed to wiggle our way up to the scene. You know when you hear the phrase, "some things can't be unseen"? This was one of them. The lady, what was left of her, had been tied to the trailer in the truck. Then someone pulled the kingpin, that piece that locks the two together, and let down the landing gear. The driver, who was now sitting in the back of a police car, handcuffed, his head hung limp with his forehead on the back of the seat, was crying big heavy sobs, and there was vomit on his shirt. We could hear them through the closed door. He was screaming that he had nothing to do with it, and praying to God to be forgiven for what he had done. That poor driver had obviously not done his safety check before he left, and just decided to pull out of his space while she was attached. Without getting too graphic, I can tell you that a normal human body should never look like that. It was like something you would see from a Saw film. I remember stumbling back and bumping into another driver. He just looked at me, pale, and looked as if he was going to get sick. I don't do well with that body function, so I moved quickly away from him and started making my way back to the truck. I was basically running back, without even thinking about having my ex with me. I made it to the truck and tugged on the door, but it wouldn't open. So I ran to the truck stop full speed. I was going to be sick, and I'd rather not have people see me or watch me. I passed the spot where the bobtail truck was parked, and I noticed it was gone. My ex made it into the truck stop looking for me. He said he would walk me back to the truck, so I could get some rest and forget about this awful night. Yeah, right. Like I could sleep after that. He turned on the radio and began to talk to the other drivers. No one else had seen much. There hadn't even been much lizard traffic. The police had been working overtime that night, cleaning up the truck stops after they had caught wind of the first few crime scenes. I sat in the bunk and just kind of stared out of the windshield at the flashing lights. There was a tap on the door all of a sudden, and it nearly made me jump through the roof. A police officer said he was getting statements from everyone at the truck stop. He gave us the rundown about safety in numbers and to not go anywhere alone. I wasn't even planning on leaving this truck. I told him about the creepy guy that smiled at us in the bobtail truck, and I gave him a description of the truck. But the officer didn't see the point of me telling him about a creepy guy, but he took down the information anyway. I don't think I slept for days after that. I just kept seeing the image of that woman. Flashes kept going through my head. The vivid image of her face, the red rag that was in her mouth, and the 100-mile-per-hour tape around her wrists, tying her to the headache rack. She had obviously struggled because there were bruises formed on her stomach and her face. Mascara was running down her cheeks, and that smell of iron. I can barely recount this story to you without being queasy. It didn't seem to faze my ex much. He went on like it wasn't anything big or special. After a few weeks, I finally managed to get the image out of my head, or I had finally convinced myself that it wasn't real. It was just a scene from a scary movie. Yeah, that's what it was. Either way, I was glad for the time being having it out of my head. Fast forward to February, about 3 months after that incident, and we were heading to New Orleans. I was super excited to see the area and hopefully get in to see the Mardi Gras. I wanted to visit the cemeteries to see the mausoleums and go into the voodoo shops and such. We had an extra few hours to spend there, so I was happy when my ex said we could go wandering around for a bit. We parked at this little truck stop. It was one that didn't show up on the big Rand McNally maps. We were told about it by another driver. It really wasn't more than a hole in the wall, a ma-and-pa shop with a small dirt lot and a flickering light pole on one end, but it was within walking distance of the French Quarter, which was where I wanted to go.
Hey there, Purple Pete. What brings you out all this way?
The voice on the CB radio was loud, so he was really close. There were only 2 other trucks in the lot, an old Freightliner hauling a Swift trailer and a dark green Kenworth that had a cattle car in the back hauling cows. My ex was still a bit miffed about being stood up months ago. He could really hold a grudge when he wanted to. "Maniac, man, where the heck have you been? Why'd you stand us up back there, buddy?" My ex radioed back.
Man, you know how it is. Cops make me a bit uneasy, and I'd rather not get caught.
Caught? What do you mean, man? My ex questioned.
Don't worry about it. You just keep an eye on that girl of yours. I'd really hate for something bad to happen to her. Like all of those other girls.
We watched the CB key up, again burying the needle on the radio. The signal was so high, it had to be in the same freaking truck stop. Maniac was keyed up, but just kind of breathing into the mic.
You know, I really like to play with them before I destroy them. Nasty. They're so nasty, so dirty, so defiled. You know they had it coming.
It sounded like he was talking through gritted teeth. His voice was louder than before. We could hear the rumble of a truck heading down the one-way street that ended in the truck stop. We looked at each other. This was the only time I'd ever seen anything like fear in my ex's eyes. Tears began to well up in mine, and for the first time I was truly scared. A dust cloud came rolling up into the truck stop, and this dark, black, menacing Peterbilt with a cattle guard and a brow came rolling by slowly. The driver keyed up just as he went past the nose of our truck. It was that same creepy guy, creepy eyes, creepy smile from the truck stop months ago. He twisted that freaking grin at me as he put the mic up to his lips.
Be safe out there, you two. I'd hate to run into you again.
His CB handle was pinstriped on his driver door, saying Maniac in bright red letters. We reported this to the police, though there wasn't a very big search going on for him. Guess there wasn't enough concrete evidence beyond what he said to us. In April of 2004, we headed back to Alaska because my ex's father had a massive heart attack. We stayed there for a while before heading back onto the road. As far as I know, there were 7 total scenes or incidents. There could have been more. Who knows how long he had actually been doing this? I don't know if the guy was ever caught, and I found evidence online about the other incidents, but never any answer on if he was still out there. I can tell you one thing though. The second time around, I wasn't making friends with anyone on the road, and I always kept a 6-inch blade on me at all times, just in case I ever saw a Maniac again.